Hello everyone. I hope that you're all well. Hope that the new year is treating you kindly. We are going to try and get through Tarzan and the Golden Lion tonight. We made it about a third of the way through the last time, so maybe we'll finish it tonight, maybe we won't. We will see what happens. Chapter 6. Death Steals Behind. And by the way, if you are new here, or if you want to watch previous videos of readings, all of my Twitch streams are on my YouTube channel. You can go check out all of those videos, get caught up. They are not in the order that they were originally streamed in, unfortunately, because I'm a dumbass. But eventually I will be putting them into playlists in order by the stories so that you can keep up with them. And if anyone would like to read along with this particular story, I will drop a link in the chat, and you can read along if you'd like to. And we are currently on Chapter 6, Death Steals Behind. During the afternoon of the day that Tarzan discovered the camp of the conspirators, a watcher upon the crumbling outer wall of the ruined city of Opar descried a party of men moving downward into the valley from the summit of the encircling cliff. Tarzan, Jane Clayton, and their black Waziri were the only strangers that the denizens of Opar had ever seen within their valley during the lifetime of the oldest among them, and only in half-forgotten legends of a bygone past was there any suggestion that strangers other than these had ever visited Opar. Yet from time immemorial a guard had always remained upon the summit of the outer wall. Now a single knurled and crippled man-like creature was all that recalled the numerous lithe warriors of lost Atlantis. For down through the long ages the race had deteriorated, and finally, through occasional mating with the great apes, the men had become the beast-like things of modern Opar. Strange and inexplicable had been the providence of nature that had confined this deterioration almost solely to the males, leaving the females straight, well-formed, often of comely and even beautiful features, a condition that might be largely attributed to the fact that female infants possessing ape-like characteristics were immediately destroyed, while, on the other hand, boy babies who possessed purely human attributes were done away with. Hi, Sober. I'm glad you could join us for the stream. Oops, I just clicked the wrong button. Don't mind me, folks. I will get this down. Typical indeed of the male inhabitants of Opar was the lone watcher upon the outer city wall, a short, stocky man with matted hair and beard. His tangled locks growing low upon a low, receding forehead, small, close-set eyes, and fang-like teeth bore evidence of his simian ancestry, as did his short, crooked legs and long, muscular, ape-like arms, all scantily hair-covered, as was his torso. As his wicked, blood-rimmed eyes watched the progress of the party across the valley towards Opar, evidences of his growing excitement were manifested in the increased rapidity of his breathing, and low, almost inaudible growls that issued from his throat. The strangers were too far distant to be recognizable only as human beings, and their number to be roughly approximated as between 2 and 3 score. Having assured himself of these two facts, the watcher descended from the outer wall, crossed the space between it and the inner wall, through which he passed, and at a rapid trot crossed the broad avenue beyond, and disappeared within the crumbling but still magnificent temple beyond. Kaj, the high priest of Opar, squatted beneath the shade of the giant trees which now overgrew what had once been one of the gardens of the ancient temple. With him were a dozen members of the lesser priesthood, the intimate cronies of the high priest, who were startled by the sudden advent of one of the inferior members of the clan of Opar. The fellow hurried breathlessly to Kaj. "Kaj," he cried, "strange men descend upon Opar. From the northwest they have come into the valley from beyond the barrier cliffs. 50 of them at least, perhaps half again that number. I saw them as I watched from the summit of the outer wall, but further than they are men I cannot say, for they are still a great distance away. Not since the great Tarmangani came among us last have there been strangers within Opar." "It has been many moons since the great Tarmangani, who called himself Tarzan of the Apes, was among us," said Kaj. "He promised us to return before the rain to see that no harm had befallen Law, but he did not come back, and Law has always insisted that he is dead. Have you told any other of what you have seen?" he demanded, turning suddenly upon the messenger. "No," replied the latter. "Good," exclaimed Kaj. "Come, we will all go to the outer wall and see who it is who dares enter forbidden Opar, and let no one breathe a word of what Blah has told us until I give permission." "The word of Kaj is law until Law speaks," murmured one of the priests. Kaj turned a scowling face upon the speaker. "I am High Priest of Opar," he growled. "Who dares disobey me?" "But Law is High Priestess," said one, "and the High Priestess is the Queen of Opar." "But the High Priest can offer whom he will a sacrifice in the chamber of the dead or to the flaming god," Kaj reminded the other meaningly. "We shall keep silence, Kaj," replied the priest, cringing. "Good," growled the high priest, and led the way from the garden through the corridors of the temple, back towards the outer wall of Opar. From here they watched the approaching party that was in plain view of them, far out across the valley. The watchers conversed in low gutturals in the language of the great apes, interspersed with which were occasional words and phrases of a strange tongue that were doubtless corrupted forms of the ancient language of Atlantis, handed down through countless generations from their human progenitors, that now extinct race whose cities and civilization lie buried deep beneath the tossing waves of the Atlantic, and whose adventurous spirit had, in remote ages, caused them to penetrate into the heart of Africa in search of gold and to build there, in duplication of their far-home cities, the magnificent city of Opar. As Kaj and his followers watched from beneath shaggy brows, the strangers plodded laboriously beneath the now declining equatorial sun across the rocky barren valley. A gray little monkey eyed them from amidst the foliage of one of the giant trees that had forced its way through the pavement of the ancient avenue behind them. A solemn, sad-faced little monkey it was, but like all his kind overcome by curiosity, and finally to such an extent that his fear of the fierce males of Opar was so considerably overcome that he at last swung lightly from the tree to the pavement, made his way through the inner wall and up the inside of the outer wall to a position in their rear, where he could hide behind one of the massive granite blocks of the crumbling wall in comparative safety from detection, the while he might overhear the conversation of the Oparians, all of which that was carried on in the language of the great apes he could understand perfectly. The afternoon was drawing to a close before the slowly moving company approaching Opar was close enough for individuals to be recognizable in any way. And then presently one of the younger priests exclaimed excitedly, "It is he, Kaj. It is the great Tarmangani, who calls himself Tarzan of the Apes. I can see him plainly. The others are all black men. He is urging them on, prodding them with his spear. They act as though they were afraid and very tired, but he is forcing them forward." "Are you sure?" demanded Kaj. "Are you sure that it is Tarzan of the Apes?" "I am positive," replied the speaker, and then another of the priests joined his assurances to that of his fellow. At last they were close enough so that Kodge himself, whose eyesight was not as good as that of the younger members of the company, realized that it was indeed Tarzan of the Apes who was returning to Opar. The high priest scowled angrily in thought. Suddenly he turned upon the others. "He must not come," he cried. "He must not enter Opar. Hasten and fetch 100 fighting men. We will meet them as they come through the outer wall and slay them, one by one." "But Law," cried one who had aroused Kodge's anger in the garden. "I distinctly recall that Law offered friendship to Opar, the friendship of Opar to Tarzan of the Apes upon that time, many moons ago, that he saved her from the tusks of infuriated Tantor." "Silence," growled Kodge. "He shall not enter. We shall slay them all, though we need not know their identity until it is too late. Do you understand? And know, too, that whosoever attempts to thwart my purpose shall die. And he died not as a sacrifice. He shall die at my hands, but die he shall. You hear me?" And he pointed an unclean finger at the trembling priest. Manu, the monkey, hearing all this, was almost bursting with excitement. He knew Tarzan of the Apes, as all the migratory monkeys the length and breadth of Africa knew him. He knew him for a friend and protector. To Manu, the males of Opar were neither beast, nor man, nor friend. He knew them as cruel and surly creatures who ate the flesh of his kind, and he hated them accordingly. He was therefore greatly exercised at the plot that he had heard discussed, which was aimed at the life of the great Tarmangani. He scratched his little gray head, and the root of his tail, and his belly, as he attempted to mentally digest what he had heard, and bring forth from the dim recesses of his little brain a plan to foil the priests and save Tarzan of the Apes. He made grotesque grimaces that were aimed at the unsuspecting Kodge and his followers, but which failed to perturb them, possibly because a huge granite block hid the little monkey from them. This was quite the most momentous thing that had occurred in the life of Manu. He wanted to jump up and down and dance and screech and jabber, to scold and threaten the hated Oparians. But something told him that nothing would be gained by this, other than perhaps to launch in his direction a shower of granite missiles, which the priest knew only too well how to throw with accuracy. Now Manu was not a deep thinker, but upon this occasion he quite outdid himself, and managed to concentrate his mind upon the thing at hand rather than permit it being distracted by each falling leaf or buzzing insect. He even permitted a succulent caterpillar to crawl within his reach and out again without impunity. Just before darkness fell, Kodge saw a little gray monkey disappear over the summit of the outer wall 50 paces from where he crouched with his fellows, waiting for the coming of the fighting men. But so numerous were the monkeys about the ruins of Opar that the occurrence left Kodge's mind almost as quickly as the monkey disappeared from his view, and in the gathering gloom, he did not see the little gray figure scampering off across the valley towards the band of intruders, who now appeared to have stopped to rest at the foot of the large copse which stood alone out in the valley, about a mile from the city. Little Manu was very much afraid out there alone in the growing dusk, and he scampered very fast with his tail bowed up and out behind him. All the time he cast frightened glances to the right and left. The moment he reached the copse, he scampered up its face as fast as he could. It was really a huge, precipitous granite rock that was almost perpendicular sides, but sufficiently weather-worn to make its ascent easy to little Manu. He paused a moment at the summit to get his breath and still the beatings of his frightened little heart, and then he made his way around to a point where he could look down upon the party beneath. There indeed was the great Tarmangani Tarzan, and with him were some 50 Gomangani. The latter were splicing together a number of long, straight poles, which they had laid upon the ground in 2 parallel lines. Across these 2, at intervals of a foot or more, they were lashing smaller, straight branches about 18 inches in length, the whole forming a crude but substantial ladder. The purpose of all this Manu, of course, did not understand, nor did he know that it had been evolved from the fertile brain of Flora Hawkes as a means of scaling the precipitous copse, at the summit of which lay the outer entrance to the treasure vaults of Opar. Nor did Manu know that the party had no intention of entering the city of Opar, and were therefore in no danger of becoming victims of Kaj's hidden assassins. To him, the danger to Tarzan of the Apes was very real, and so, having regained his breath, he lost no time in delivering his warning to the friend of his people. "Tarzan," he cried, in a language that was common to both. The white man and the blacks looked up at the sound of his chattering voice. "It is Manu, Tarzan," continued the little monkey, "who has come to tell you not to go to Opar. Kaj and his people await within the outer wall to slay you." The blacks, having discovered that the author of the disturbance was nothing but a little gray monkey, returned immediately to their work, while the white man similarly ignored his words of warning. Manu was not surprised at the lack of interest displayed by the blacks, for he knew that they did not understand his language, but he could not comprehend why Tarzan failed to pay any attention whatsoever to him. Again and again he called Tarzan by name. Again and again he shrieked his warning to the ape-man, but without eliciting any reply or any information that the great Tarmangani had either heard or understood him. Manu was mystified. What had occurred to render Tarzan of the Apes so indifferent to the warnings of his old friend? At last the little monkey gave it up, and looked longingly back in the direction of the trees within the walled city of Opar. It was now very dark, and he trembled at the thought of recrossing the valley, where he knew enemies might prowl by night. He scratched his head, and he hugged his knees, then sat there whimpering, a very forlorn and unhappy little ball of a monkey. But however uncomfortable he was upon the high copse, he was comparatively safe, and so he decided to remain there during the night, rather than venture the terrifying return trip through the darkness. Thus it was that he saw the ladder completed and erected against the side of the copse, and when the moon rose at last and lighted the scene, he saw Tarzan of the Apes urging his men to mount the ladder. He had never seen Tarzan thus rough and cruel with the blacks who accompanied him. Manu knew how ferocious the great Tarmangani could be with an enemy, whether man or beast, but he had never seen him accord such treatment to the blacks who were his friends. One by one, and with evident reluctance, the blacks ascended the ladder, continually urged forward to greater speed by the sharp spear of the white man. When they had all ascended, Tarzan followed, and Manu saw them disappear apparently into the heart of the great rock. It was only a short time later that they commenced to reappear, and now each was burdened by two heavy objects, which appeared to Manu to be very similar to some of the smaller stone blocks that had been used in the construction of the buildings in Opar. He saw them take the blocks to the edge of the copse and cast them over to the ground beneath, and when the last of the blocks had emerged with his load and cast it to the valley below, one by one the party descended the ladder to the foot of the copse. But this time Tarzan of the Apes went first. Then they lowered the ladder and took it apart and laid its pieces close to the foot of the cliff, after which they took up the blocks which had been brought from the heart of the copse, and followed Tarzan, who had set out in the lead. They commenced to retrace their steps towards the rim of the valley. Manu would have been very much mystified had he been a man, but being only a monkey, he saw only what he saw without attempting to reason very much about it. He knew that the ways of men were peculiar and oftentimes unaccountable. For example, the Gomangani, who could not travel through the jungle and the forest with the ease of any other of the animals which frequented them, added to their difficulties by loading themselves down with additional weights in the form of metal anklets and armlets, with necklaces and girdles, and with skins of animals, which did nothing more than impede their progress, and render life much more complicated than that which the untrammeled beasts enjoyed. Manu, whenever he gave the matter a thought, congratulated himself that he was not a man. He pitied the foolish, unreasonable creatures. Manu must have slept. He thought that he had only closed his eyes a moment, but when he opened them the rosy light of dawn had overspread the desolate valley. Just disappearing over the cliffs to the northeast, he could see the last of Tarzan's party commencing the descent of the barrier. Then Manu turned his face towards Opar and prepared to descend from the copse and scamper back to the safety of his trees within the walls of Opar. But first he would reconnoiter. Sheeta, the panther, might still be abroad, and so he scampered around the edge of the copse to a point where he could see the entire valley floor between himself and Opar. And there it was that he saw again that which filled him with the greatest excitement. For debouching from the ruined outer wall of Opar was a large company of Opar's frightful men. Fully 100 of them Manu could have counted, had Manu been able to count. They seemed to be coming towards the copse, and he sat and watched them as they approached, deciding to defer his return to the city until after the path was cleared of hated Oparians. It occurred to him that they were coming after him, for the egotism of the lower animals is inordinate. Because he was a monkey, the idea did not seem at all ridiculous, and so he hid behind a jutting rock, with only one little bright eye exposed to the enemy. He saw them come closer, and he grew very much excited, though he was not at all afraid, for he knew that if they ascended one side of the copse, she could descend the other and be halfway to Opar before they could possibly locate him again. On and on they came, but they did not stop at the copse. As a matter of fact, they did not come very close to it, but continued on beyond it. Then it was that the truth of the matter flashed into the little brain of the monkey. Kaj and his people were pursuing Tarzan of the Apes to slay him. If Manu had been offended by Tarzan's indifference to him upon the night before, he had evidently forgotten it, for now he was quite as excited about the danger which he saw menace the ape-man as he had been upon the afternoon previous. At first he thought of running ahead, and again warning Tarzan, but he feared to venture so far from the trees of Opar, even if the thought of having to pass the hated Oparians had not been sufficient to deter him from carrying out his plan. For a few minutes he sat watching them, until they had all passed the copse, and then it became quite clear to him that they were heading directly for the spot at which the last of Tarzan's party had disappeared from the valley. There could be no doubt that they were in pursuit of the ape-man. Manu scanned the valley once more towards Opar. There was nothing in sight to deter him from an attempted return, and so, with the agility of his kind, he scampered down the vertical face of the copse and was off at great speed towards the city's wall. Just when he formulated the plan that he eventually followed, it is difficult to say. Perhaps he thought it all out as he sat upon the copse, watching Kaj and his people upon the trail of the ape-man. Or perhaps it occurred to him while he was scampering across the barren waste towards Opar. It may just have popped into his mind from a clear sky after he had regained the leafy sanctuary of his own trees. Be that however as it may, the fact remains that as Law, High Priestess and Princess of Opar, in company with several of her priestesses, was bathing in a pool in one of the temple gardens, she was startled by the screaming of a monkey, swinging frantically by his tail from the branch of a great tree which overspread the pool. It was a little gray monkey with a face so wise and serious that one might easily have imagined that the fate of nations lay constantly upon the shoulders of its owner. "Law, Law," it screamed. "They have gone to kill Tarzan. They have gone to kill Tarzan." At the sound of that name, Law was instantly all attention. Standing waist-deep in the pool, she looked up at the little monkey questioningly. "What do you mean, Manu?" she asked. "It has been many moons since Tarzan was at Opar. He is not here now. What are you talking about?" "I saw him," screamed Manu. "I saw him last night with Mini Gomangani. He came to the great rock that lies in the valley before Opar. With all his men he climbed to the top of it, went into the heart of it, and came out with stones, which they threw down into the valley. Afterward they descended from the rock and picked up the stones again and left the valley. There," and Manu pointed towards the northeast with one of his hairy little fingers. "How do you know it was Tarzan of the Apes?" asked Law. "Does Manu not know his cousin and his friend?" demanded the monkey. "With my eyes I saw him. It was Tarzan of the Apes." Law of Opar puckered her brows in thought. Deep in her heart smoldered the fires of her great love for Tarzan. Fires that had been quenched by the necessity that had compelled her marriage with Kaj since last she had seen the ape-man. For it is written among the laws of Opar that the high priestess of the flaming god must take a mate within a certain number of years after her consecration. For many moons had Law longed to make Tarzan that mate. The ape-man had not loved her, and finally she had come to a realization that he could never love her. Afterward, she had bowed to the frightful fate that had placed her in the arms of Kaj. As month after month had passed, and Tarzan had not returned to Opar, as he had promised he would do, to see that no harm befell La, she had come to accept the opinion of Kaj that the ape-man was dead, and though she hated the repulsive Kaj, nonetheless, her love for Tarzan had gradually become little more than a sorrowful memory. Now to learn that he was alive and had been so near was like reopening an old wound. At first she comprehended little else than that Tarzan had been close to Opar, but presently the cries of Manu aroused her to a realization that the ape-man was in danger. Just what the danger was, she did not know. "Who has gone to kill Tarzan of the Apes?" she demanded suddenly. "Kaj! Kaj!" shrieked Manu. "He has gone with many, many men, and is following upon the spoor of Tarzan." La sprang quickly from the pool, seized her girdle and ornaments from her attendant, and adjusted them hurriedly, sped through the garden and into the temple. Hello, everyone. Hello, Zoiku. Hello, Albel. I hope that you are well. I hope that 2020 is treating you all well. If anyone wants to read along with the story, I'm dropping the link in the chat. We are up to chapter 7. That is a cute emoji, Zoiku. That is very cute. I'm glad 2020 is treating you okay, Albo. I hope that you are feeling well. I need some more water. Let us all drink. We must stay hydrated. Yeah, 2019 did suck. 2017 and 2018 sucked. Not quite as bad as 2019, but 2019 was awful. But we shall leave it behind us. Okay, on to our next chapter. You must sacrifice him. It would help if I turned the microphone towards me. Warily, Kaj and his 100 frightful followers, armed with their bludgeons and knives, crept stealthily down the face of the barrier into the valley below, upon the trail of the white man and his black companions. They made no haste, for they had noted from the summit of Opar's outer wall that the party they were pursuing moved very slowly, though why they did not know. For they had been at too great a distance to see the burden that each of the blacks carried. Excuse me. Nor was it Kaj's desire to overtake his quarry by daylight, his plans contemplating a stealthy night attack, the suddenness of which, together with a great number of his followers, might easily confuse and overwhelm a sleeping camp. The spoor they followed was well marked. There could be no mistaking it, and they moved slowly down the now gentle declivity towards the bottom of the valley. It was close to noon that they were brought to a sudden halt by the discovery of a thorn boma recently constructed in a small clearing just ahead of them. From the center of the boma arose the thin smoke of a dying fire. Here, then, was the camp of the ape-man. Kaj drew his followers into the concealment of the thick bushes that bordered the trail, and from there he sent ahead a single man to reconnoiter. It was but a few moments later that the latter returned to say that the camp was deserted, and once again Kaj moved forward with his men. Entering the boma, they examined it in an effort to estimate the size of the party that accompanied Tarzan. As they were thus occupied, Kaj saw something lying half concealed by bushes at the far end of the boma. Very warily he approached it, for there was that about it which not only aroused his curiosity but prompted him to caution, for it resembled indistinctly the figure of a man lying huddled upon the ground. With ready bludgeons, a dozen of them approached the thing that had aroused Kaj's curiosity, and when they had come close to it, they saw lying before them the lifeless figure of Tarzan of the Apes. "The flaming god has reached forth to avenge his desecrated altar," cried the high priest, his eyes glowing with the maniacal fires of fanaticism. But another priest, more practical, perhaps, or at least more cautious, kneeled beside the figure of the ape-man and placed his ear against the latter's heart. "He is not dead," he whispered. "Perhaps he only sleeps." "Seize him, then, quickly," cried Kaj, and an instant later Tarzan's body was covered by the hairy forms of as many of the frightful men as could pile upon him. He offered no resistance. He did not even open his eyes, and presently his arms were securely bound behind him. "Drag him forth, where the eye of the flaming god may rest upon him," cried Kaj. They dragged Tarzan out into the center of the boma into the full light of the sun, and Kaj, the high priest, drawing his knife from his loincloth, raised it above his head and stood over the prostrate form of his intended victim. Kaj's followers formed a rough circle about the ape-man, and some of them pressed close behind their leader. They appeared uneasy, looking alternately at Tarzan and their high priest, and then casting furtive glances at the sun, riding high in his cloud-mottled sky. But whatever the thoughts that troubled their half-savage brains, there was only one who dared voice his, and he was the same priest who, upon the preceding day, had questioned Kaj's proposal to slay the ape-man. "Kaj," he said now, "who are you to offer up a sacrifice to the flaming god? It is the privilege alone of Law, our high priestess and our queen, and indeed she will be angry when she learns what you have done." "Silence, Dooth," cried Kaj. "I, Kaj, am the high priest of Opar. I, Kaj, am the mate of Law, the queen. My word, too, is law in Opar, and you would remain a priest, and you would remain alive. Keep silence." "Your word is not law," replied Doth angrily. "And if you anger Law, the high priestess, or if you anger the flaming god, you may be punished as another. If you make this sacrifice, both will be angry." "Enough," cried Kaj. "The flaming god has spoken to me and has demanded that I offer up as sacrifice this defiler of his temple." He knelt beside the ape-man and touched his breast above the heart with the point of his sharp blade, and then he raised the weapon high above him, preparatory to the final plunge into the living heart. At that instant a cloud passed before the face of the sun, and a shadow rested upon them. A murmur rose from the surrounding priests. "Look," cried Dooth, "the flaming god is angry. He has hidden his face from the people of Opar." Kaj paused. He cast a half-defiant, half-frightened look at the cloud obscuring the face of the sun. Then he rose slowly to his feet, and extending his arms upward towards the hidden god of day, he remained for a moment silent in apparently attentive and listening attitude. Then suddenly he turned upon his followers. "Priests of Opar," he cried, "the flaming god has spoken to his high priest, Kaj. He is not angered. He but wishes to speak to me alone, and he directs that you go away into the jungle and wait until he has come and spoken to Kaj, after which I shall call you to return. Go." For the most part they seemed to accept the word of Kaj's law, but Dooth and a few others, doubtless prompted by a certain skepticism, hesitated. "Begone," commanded Kaj, and so powerful is the habit of obedience that the doubters finally turned away and melted into the jungle with the others. A crafty smile lighted the cruel face of the high priest as the last of them disappeared from sight, and then he once again turned his attention to the ape-man. That, deep within his breast, however, lurked an inherent fear of his deity, was evidenced by the fact that he turned questioning glances towards the sky. He had determined to slay the ape-man while Duth and the others were absent, yet the fear of his god restrained his hand until the light of his deity would shine forth upon him once more, and assure him that the thing he contemplated might meet with favor. It was a large cloud that overcast the sun, and while Kodge waited, his nervousness increased. 6 times he raised his knife for the fatal blow, yet in each instance his superstition prevented the consummation of the act. 5, 10, 15 minutes passed, and still the sun remained obscured. But now at last Kodge could see that it was nearing the edge of the cloud, and once again he took his position, kneeling beside the ape-man, with his blade ready for the moment when the sunlight would flood again, for the last time, the living Tarzan. He saw it sweeping slowly across the boma towards him, and as it came, a look of demoniacal hatred shone in his close-set, wicked eyes. Another instant, and the flaming god would have set the seal of his approval upon the sacrifice. Kodge trembled in anticipation. He raised the knife a trifle higher, his muscles tensed for the downward plunge, and then the silence of the jungle was broken by a woman's voice, raised almost to a scream. "Kodge," came the single word, but with all the suddenness and all the surprising effect of lightning from a clear sky. His knife still poised on high, the high priest turned in the direction of the interruption to see at the clearing's edge the figure of Law, the high priestess, and behind her Duth and a score of the lesser priests. "What means this, Kodge?" demanded Law, angrily, approaching rapidly towards him across the clearing. Sullenly, the high priest rose. "The flaming god demanded the life of this unbeliever," he cried. "Speaker of lies," retorted Law. "The flaming god communicates with men through the lips of his high priestess only. Too often already have you attempted to thwart the will of your queen. Know then, Kodge, that the power of life and death which your queen holds is as potent over you as another. During the long ages that Opar has endured, our legends tell us that more than one high priest has been offered upon the altar to the flaming god, and it is not unlikely that yet another may go the way of the presumptuous. Curb, therefore, your vanity and your lust for power, lest they prove your undoing." Kodge sheathed his knife and turned sullenly away, casting a venomous look at Duth, to whom he evidently attributed his undoing. That he was temporarily abashed by the presence of his queen was evident. But to those who knew Kodge, there was little doubt that he still harbored his intention to dispatch the ape-man, and if the opportunity ever presented itself, that he would do so, for Kodge had a strong following among the people and priests of Opar. There were many who doubted that Law would ever dare to incur the displeasure and anger of so important a portion of her followers as to cause the death or degradation of their high priest, who occupied his office by virtue of laws and customs so old that their origin had been long lost in antiquity. For years she had found first one excuse and then another to delay the ceremonies that would unite her in marriage to the high priest. She had further aroused the antagonism of her people by palpable proofs of her infatuation for the ape-man, and even though at last she had been compelled to mate with Kodge, she had made no effort whatsoever to conceal her hatred and loathing for the man. How much further she could go with impunity was a question that often troubled those whose position in Opar depended upon her favor, and knowing all these conditions as he did, it was not strange that Kodge should entertain treasonable thoughts towards his queen. Leagued with him in treachery was Oa, a priestess who aspired to the power and offices of Law. If Law could be done away with, then Kodge had the influence to see that Oa became high priestess. He also had Oa's promise to mate with him and permit him to rule as king, but as yet both were bound by the superstitious fear of their flaming deity, and because of this fact was the life of Law temporarily made safe. It required, however, but the slightest spark to ignite the flames of treason that were smoldering about her. So far, she was well within her rights in forbidding the sacrifice of Tarzan by the high priest. But her fate, her very life perhaps, depended upon her future treatment of the prisoner. Should she spare him? Should she evidence in any way a return of the great love she had once almost publicly avowed for him? It was likely that her doom would be sealed. It was even questionable whether or not she might with impunity spare his life and set him at liberty. Hodge and the others watched her closely now as she crossed to the side of Tarzan. Standing there silently for several moments, she looked down upon him. "He is already dead?" she asked. "He was not dead when Kodge sent us away," volunteered Duth. "If he is dead now, it is because Kodge killed him while we were away." "I did not kill him," said Kodge. "That remains, as Law, our queen, has told you, for her to do. The eye of the flaming god looks down upon you, High Priestess of Opar. The knife is at your hip. The sacrifice lies before you." Law ignored the man's words and turned back towards Duth. "If he still lives," she said, "construct a litter and bear him back to Opar." Thus once more came Tarzan of the Apes into the ancient colonial city of the Atlanteans. The effects of the narcotic that Kraski had administered to him did not wear off for many hours. It was night when he opened his eyes, and for a moment he was bewildered by the darkness and the silence that surrounded him. All that he could scent at first was that he lay upon a pile of furs and that he was uninjured, for he felt no pain. Slowly there broke through the fog of his drugged brain recollection of the last moment before unconsciousness had overcome him, and presently he realized the trick that had been played upon him. For how long he had been unconscious and where he was, he could not imagine. Slowly he arose to his feet, finding that except for a slight dizziness, he was quite himself. Cautiously he felt around in the darkness, moving with care, a hand outstretched, and always feeling carefully with his feet for a secure footing. Almost immediately a stone wall stopped his progress, and this he followed around four sides of what he soon realized was a small room in which there were but two openings, a door upon each of the opposite sides. Only his senses of touch and smell were of value to him here. These told him only at first that he was imprisoned in a subterranean chamber, but as the effects of the narcotic diminished, the keenness of the latter returned, and with its return there was borne in upon Tarzan's brain an insistent impression of familiarity in certain fragrant odors that impinged upon his olfactory organs. A haunting suggestion that he had known them before, under similar circumstances. Presently from above, through earth and masonry, came the shadow of an uncanny scream. Just the faintest suggestion of it reached the keen ears of the ape-man, but it was sufficient to flood his mind with vivid recollections and, by association of ideas, to fix the identity of the familiar odors about him. He knew at last that he was in the dark pit beneath Opar. Above him, in her chamber in the temple, Law the High Priestess tossed upon a sleepless couch. She knew all too well the temper of her people and the treachery of the High Priest Kodge. She knew the religious fanaticism which prompted the oft-time maniacal actions of her bestial and ignorant followers, and she guessed truly that Kodge would inflame them against her, should she fail this time in sacrificing the ape-man to the flaming god. And it was the effort to find an escape from her dilemma that left her sleepless, for it was not in the heart of Law to sacrifice Tarzan of the Apes. High priestess of a horrid cult though she was, and queen of a race of half-beasts, yet she was a woman too, a woman who had loved but once and given that love to the godlike ape-man, who was again within her power. Twice before had he escaped her sacrificial knife. In the final instance, love had at last triumphed over jealousy and fanaticism, and Law, the woman, had realized that never again could she place in jeopardy the life of the man she loved, however hopeless she knew that love to be. Tonight she was faced with a problem that she felt almost beyond her powers of solution. The fact that she was mated with Koch removed the last vestige of hope that she had ever had of becoming the wife of the ape-man. Yet she was no less determined to save Tarzan if it were possible. Twice had he saved her life, once from a mad priest, and once from Tantor in Must. Then, too, she had given her word that when Tarzan came again to Opar, he came in friendship, and would be received in friendship. But the influence of Koch was great, and she knew that that influence had been directly unremittingly against the ape-man. She had seen it in the attitude of her followers from the very moment that they had placed Tarzan upon a litter to bear him back to Opar. She had seen it in the evil glances that had been cast at her. Sooner or later, they would dare denounce her. All that they needed was some slight new excuse that she knew they eagerly awaited in her forthcoming attitude towards Tarzan. It was well after midnight when there came to her one of the priestesses who remained always upon guard outside her chamber door. "Duth would speak to you," whispered the handmaiden. "It is late," replied Law, "and men are not permitted in this part of the temple. How came he here, and why?" "He says that he comes in the service of Law, who is in great danger," replied the girl. "Fetch him here, then," said Law, "and as you value your life, see that you tell no one." "I shall be as voiceless as the stones of the altar," replied the girl, as she turned and left the chamber. A moment later she returned, bringing Duth, who halted a few feet from the high priestess and saluted her. Law signaled to the girl who had brought him to depart, and then she turned questioningly to the man. "Speak, Duth," she commanded. "We all know," he said, "of Law's love for the strange ape-man, and it is not for me, a lesser priest, to question the thoughts or acts of my high priestess. It is only for me to serve, as those would do better to serve who now plot against you." "What do you mean, Duth? Who plots against me?" "Even at this minute are Kaj and O and several of the priests and priestesses carrying out a plan for your undoing. They are setting spies to watch you, knowing that you would liberate the ape-man, because there will come to you one who will tell you that to permit him to escape will be the easiest solution of your problem. This one will be sent by Kaj, and then those who watch you will report to the people and to the priests that they have seen you lead the sacrifice to liberty. But even that will avail you nothing, for Kaj and O and the others have placed upon the trail from Opar many men in hiding, who will fall upon the ape-man and slay him before the flaming god has descended twice into the western forest. In but one way only may you save yourself, Law of Opar." "And what is that way?" she asked. "You must, with your own hands, upon the temple of our altar, sacrifice the ape-man to the flaming gods." And that is the end of that chapter. The entire previous decade sucked, honestly. All of it did. So I hope that we get a new start. I know that nothing magical happens when we move into a new year, but I will hope. All we can do is hope, right? And be the change, yes. Yes, that is very true. If we wish to see change in the world, then we must be the change we wish to see. But I wish to be rich, and I'm not sure how I be that change. I mean, I can print money, but it's illegal. I don't want to go to prison. I'm too pretty for prison. But yes, we should all be the change we wish to see in the world. And the world is a scary place right now. But then the world has always been a scary place. I love that emoji. It's adorable. It is so adorable. Alright. I will stay awake, god damn it. Well, I've been streaming an hour. It's too soon to be yawning and falling asleep, you guys. Oh my god, no. Okay. Let's pull the hair up. Maybe if I pull my hair into a tight enough ponytail, it will wake me up. We will try that. Okay, we have the ponytail going on. Alright, one last yawn for good luck there. And we'll move on with our story. We're now on Shut Up Bot. I don't know why I've got two different things coming through. Let's go play in the chat bot for a while, shall we? Where the heck even is the bot? I don't understand. In case you had any doubt, no, I don't know what I'm doing. Okay. I think we are back. I don't know what I'm doing. Have fun with the bots. Talk to them. They feel lonely. They feel lonely and ignored. Show them love. I'm gonna yawn again. Okay. Okay, we can do this. I do have enough oxygen reaching my brain, I think, to do this. Or you know what? You can hug people. You can hug the bots, maybe. I don't know. Oh, good. I can hug myself. I wrote commands and don't remember them. That's good. Okay, what the hell am I doing? Let's see. Okay, so hug me will cause Kitty Little to hug you, and hug cause you to apparently hug me. I don't understand. It is what it is, I guess. I don't know. Alright, on with the story, because that is what you came here for. You came here for stories and not for me freaking out about bots. Aw, that little birdie staring at me. That was a cute little birdie. Alright, reading. We are reading now. Come on. Come on, girl. Read. Aw, thank you for hugs. I can only hug myself, apparently. I'm sorry. I mean, I can do it that way. I tried. I did my best. Can never have too many hugs, right? Sometimes I think my streams are very strange, and that's why I don't get viewers. No one knows what I'm doing. I don't know what I'm doing. We're all having fun. We're definitely very chill here, though. We are very chill, very relaxed. I need more water. And I haven't even drinking any alcohol yet. I have a bottle of Jack Daniels here, but I haven't drinking any yet. Can you imagine if I had? My God. I'd take a shot every chapter. Does anyone know what they are doing? I certainly don't. I have no idea. I'm just chilling, having fun, hanging with my friends, reading a story, kinda, sorta. I should start doing meditations. That would be a good stream. Are you playing Borderlands? See, that's what I kind of like about doing just talky streams with no webcam or anything. You don't have to watch. You can just listen to me and watch something else. Shut up, bot. I turned off your commands. I'm not even reading, bot. You're a good kitty little bot, though, and I love you. I should be kinder to my bots. Okay, there's a story here somewhere that I am reading. Chapter 8. Mystery of the Past. Law had breakfasted. That's a weird word. Law had breakfasted the following morning, and had sent Duth with food for Tarzan, when there came to her a young priestess, who was the sister of Oa. Even before the girl had spoken, Law knew that she was an emissary from Kaj, and that the treachery of which Duth had warned her was already underway. The girl was ill at ease and quite evidently frightened, for she was young and held in high revere the queen whom she had good reason to know was all-powerful, and who might even inflict death upon her if she so wished. Law, who had already determined upon a plan of action that she knew would be most embarrassing to Kaj and his conspirators, waited in silence for the girl to speak. But it was some time before the girl could muster up her courage or find a proper opening. Instead, she spoke of many things that had no bearing whatsoever upon her subject, and Law, the high priestess, was amused at her discomfiture. "It is not often," said Law, "that the sister of Oa comes to the apartments of her queen unless she is bidden. I am glad to see that she at last realizes the service she owes to the high priestess of the flaming god." "I come," said the girl at last, speaking almost as one who has learned a part, "to tell you that I have overheard that which may be of interest to you, and which I am sure that you will be glad to hear." "Yes?" interrogated Law, raising her arched eyebrows. "I overheard Kaj speaking with the lesser priests," the girl continued, "and I distinctly heard him say that he would be glad if the ape-man escaped, as that would relieve you, and Kaj as well, of much embarrassment. I thought that Law, the queen, would be glad to know this, for it is known by all of us that Law has promised friendship to the ape-man, and therefore does not wish to sacrifice him upon the altar of the flaming god." "My duty is plain to me," replied Law in a haughty voice, "and I do not need Kaj nor any handmaiden to interpret it to me. I also know the prerogatives of a high priestess, and that the right of sacrifice is one of them. For this reason I prevented Kaj from sacrificing the stranger. No other hand than mine shall offer his heart's blood to the flaming god, and upon the third day he shall die beneath my knife upon the altar of our temple." The effect of these words upon the girl were precisely what Law had anticipated. She saw disappointment and chagrin written upon the face of Kaj's messenger, who now had no answer, for her instructions had not foreseen this attitude upon the part of Law. Presently the girl found some lame pretext upon which to withdraw, and when she had left the presence of the high priestess, Law could scarcely restrain a smile. She had no intention of sacrificing Tarzan, but this, of course, the sister of Oa did not know. So she returned to Kaj and repeated as nearly as she could recall it all that Law had said to her. The high priest was much chagrined, for his plan had been now not so much to encompass the destruction of Tarzan as to lead Law into the commission of an act which would bring upon her the wrath of the priests and the people of Opar, who properly instigated would demand her life in expiation. Oa, who was present when her sister returned, bit her lips, for great was her disappointment. Never before had she been so close at hand the longed for possibility of becoming high priestess. For several minutes she paced to and fro in deep thought, and then suddenly she halted before Kaj. Law loves this ape-man, she said, and even though she may sacrifice him, it is only because of fear of her people. She loves him still, loves him better, Kaj, than she has ever loved you. The ape-man knows it, and trusts her, and because he knows it, there is a way. Listen, Kaj, to Oa. We will send one to the ape-man who shall tell him that she comes from Law, and that Law has instructed her to lead him out of Opar and set him free. This one shall lead him into our ambush, and when he is killed we shall go, many of us, before Law, and accuse her of treachery. The one who led the ape-man from Opar shall say that Law ordered her to do it, and the priests and the people will be very angry, and then you shall demand the life of Law. It is very easy, and we shall be rid of both of them. Good, exclaimed Kaj. We shall do this thing at dawn upon the morrow, and before the flaming god goes to his rest at night, we shall look upon a new priestess of Opar. That night Tarzan was aroused from his sleep by a sound at one of the doors of his prison cell. He heard the bolt slip back and the door creak slowly open upon its ancient hinges. In the inky darkness he could discern no presence, but he heard the stealthy movement of sandaled feet upon the concrete floor, and then out of the darkness his name was whispered in a woman's voice. I am here, he replied. Who are you, and what do you want of Tarzan of the Apes? Your life is in danger, replied the voice. Come, follow me. Who sent you? Demanded the ape-man, his sensitive nostrils searching for a clue to the identity of the nocturnal visitor. But so heavily was the air laden with the pungent odor of some heavy perfume with which the body of the woman seemed to have been anointed, that there was no distinguishing clue by which he might judge as to whether she was one of the priestesses he had known upon the occasion of his former visits to Opar, or an entire stranger to him. Law sent me, she said, to lead you from the pits of Opar to the freedom of the outside world beyond the city's walls. Groping in the darkness, she finally found him. Here are your weapons, she said, handing them to him, and then she took his hand, turned, and led him from the dungeon through a long, winding, and equally black corridor, down flights of age-old concrete steps, through passages and corridors, openings and closings, door after door that creaked and groaned upon rusty hinges. How far they traveled thus, and in what direction, Tarzan could not guess. He had gleaned enough from Duth, when the latter brought him his food, to believe that in Law he had a friend who would aid him, for Duth had told him that she had saved him from Kaj when the latter had discovered him unconscious in the deserted boma of the Europeans who had drugged and left him. And so, the woman having said that she came from Law, Tarzan followed her willingly. He could not but recall Jane's prophecy of the evils that he might expect to befall him should he persist in undertaking this third trip to Opar, and he wondered if, after all, his wife was right, that he should never again escape from the toils of the fanatical priests of the flaming god. He had not, of course, expected to enter Opar, but there seemed to hang over the accursed city a guardian demon that threatened the life of whosoever dared approach the forbidden spot, or wrest from the forgotten treasure vaults a portion of their great hoard. For more than an hour his guide led him through the Stygian darkness of underground passages, until, ascending a flight of steps, they emerged into the center of a clump of bushes, through which the pale light of the moon was barely discernible. The fresh air, however, told him that they had reached the surface of the ground, and now the woman, who had not spoken a word since she had led him from his cell, continued on in silence, following a devious trail that wound hither and thither in an erratic fashion through a heavy forest choked with undergrowth, and always upward. From the location of the stars and moon, and from the upward trend of the trail, Tarzan knew that he was being led into the mountains that lie behind Opar, a place he had never thought of visiting, since the country appeared rough and uninviting, and not likely to harbor game such as Tarzan cared most to hunt. He was already surprised by the nature of the vegetation, for he had thought the hills barren except for stunted trees and scraggy bush. As they continued upon their way, climbing ever upward, the moon rose higher in the heavens, until its soft light revealed more keenly to the keen eyes of the ape-man the topography of the country they were traversing. And then it was that he saw they were ascending a narrow, thickly wooded gorge, and he understood why the heavy vegetation had been invisible from the plain before Opar. Himself naturally uncommunicative, the woman's silence made no particular impression upon Tarzan. Had he had anything to say, he should have said it, and likewise he assumed that there was no necessity for her speaking unless there was some good reason for speaking. For those who travel far and fast have no breath to waste upon conversation. The eastern stars were fading at the first hint of coming dawn when the two scrambled up a precipitous bank that formed the upper end of the ravine and came out upon comparatively level ground. As they advanced, the sky lightened, and presently the woman halted at the edge of a declivity, and as the day broke, Tarzan saw below him a wooded basin in the heart of the mountain, and, showing through the trees at what appeared to be some 2 or 3 miles distant, the outlines of a building that glistened and sparkled and scintillated in the light of the new sun. Then he turned and looked at his companion, and surprise and consternation were writ upon his face, for standing before him was Law, the high priestess of Opar. "You?" he exclaimed. "Now indeed will Kaj have the excuse that Duth said he sought to put you out of the way." "He will never have the opportunity to put me out of the way," replied Law, "for I shall never return to Opar." "Never return to Opar?" he exclaimed. "Then where are you going? Where can you go?" "I'm going with you," she replied. "I do not ask that you love me. I only ask that you take me away from Opar and from the enemies who would slay me." There was no other way. Manu the monkey overheard them plotting, and he came to me and told me all that they would do. Whether I saved you or sacrificed you, it had all been the same with me. They were determined to do away with me, that Oa might be high priestess and Kaj, king of Opar. But I should not have sacrificed you, Tarzan, under any circumstances, and this, then, seemed the only way in which we might both be saved. We cannot go to the north or the west across the plain of Opar, for there Kaj has placed warriors in ambush to waylay you. And though you be Tarzan, and a mighty fighter, they would overwhelm you by their very numbers and slay you. "But where are you leading me?" asked Tarzan. "I have chosen the lesser of 2 evils. In this direction lies an unknown country, filled for us Oparians with legends of grim monsters and strange people. Never has an Oparian ventured here and returned again to Opar. But if there lies in all the world a creature who would win through this unknown valley, it be you, Tarzan of the Apes." "But if you know nothing of this country or its inhabitants," demanded Tarzan, "how is it that you know so well the trail that leads to it?" "We well know the trail to the summit, but that is as far as I have ever been before. The great apes and the lions use this trail when they come down into Opar. The lions, of course, cannot tell us where it leads, and the great apes will not, for usually we are at war with them. Along this trail they come down into Opar to steal our people, and upon this trail we await to capture them, for often we offer a great ape in sacrifice to the flaming god, or rather that was our former custom. But for many years they have been too wary of us, the toll being upon the other side, though we do not know for what purpose they steal our people, unless it be that they eat them. They are a very powerful race, standing higher than Bogani, the gorilla, and infinitely more cunning, for as there is ape blood in our veins, so is there human blood in the veins of these great apes that dwell in the valley above Opar. Why is it, Law, that we must pass through this valley in order to escape from Opar? There must be some other way." "There is no other way, Tarzan of the Apes," she replied. "The avenues across the valley are guarded by Kaj's people. Our only chance of escape lies in this direction, and I have brought you along the only trail that lies in the direction and pierces the precipitous cliffs that guard Opar along the south. Across or around this valley we must go in an attempt to find an avenue across the mountain and down upon the other side. The ape-man stood gazing down into the wooden basin below them, his mind occupied with the problems of the moment. Had he been alone, he might not have come this way, for he was sufficiently confident of his own prowess to believe that he might easily have crossed the valley of Opar in comparative safety, regardless of Kadji's plans to the contrary. But he was not alone. He had now to think of Law, and he realized that in her efforts to save him, she had placed him under a moral obligation which he might not disregard. To skirt the basin, keeping as far as possible from the building, which he could see in the distance, seemed the wisest course to pursue, since, of course, his sole purpose was to find a way across the mountain and out of this inhospitable country. But the glimpses he caught of the edifice, half concealed as it was amidst the foliage of great trees, piqued his curiosity to such an extent that he felt an almost irresistible urge to investigate. He did not believe that the basin was inhabited by other than wild beasts, and he attributed the building which he saw to the handiwork of an extinct or departed people, either contemporaneous with the ancient Atlanteans who had built Opar, or perhaps built by the original Oparians themselves, but now forgotten by their descendants. The glimpse which he caught of the building suggested such size and magnificence as might belong to a palace. The ape-man knew no fear, though he possessed to a reasonable extent that caution which is inherent in all wild beasts. He would not have hesitated to pit his cunning and his prowess against the lower orders, however ferocious they might be, for like man they could not band together to his undoing. But should men elect to hunt him in numbers, he knew that a real danger would confront him, and that, in the face of their combined strength and intelligence, his own might not avail him. There was little likelihood, however, he reasoned, that the basin was inhabited by human beings. Doubtless closer investigation of the building he saw would reveal that it was but a deserted ruin, and that the most formidable foes he would encounter would be the great apes and the lions. Of neither of these had he any fear. With the former, it was even reasonable to imagine that he might establish amicable relations. Believing as he did that he must look for egress from the basin upon its opposite side, it was only natural that he should wish to choose the most direct route across the basin. Therefore his inclination to explore the valley were seconded by considerations of speed and expediency. "Come," he said to Law, and started down the declivity which led into the basin in the direction of the building ahead of them. "You are not going that way," she cried in astonishment. "Why not?" he said. "It is the shortest way across the valley, and so far as I can judge, our trail over the mountains is more likely to lie in that direction than elsewhere." "But I am afraid," she said. "The flaming god alone knows what hideous dangers lurk in the depths of that forest below us." "Only Numa and the Mangani," he said. "Of these we need have no fear." "You fear nothing," she said, "but I am only a woman." "We can die but once," replied Tarzan, "and that once we must die. To be always fearing, then, would not avert it, and would make life miserable. We shall go the short way, then, and perhaps we shall see enough to make the risk well worth while." They followed a well-worn trail downward among the bush, the trees increasing in both size and number as they approached the floor of the basin, until at last they were walking beneath the foliage of a great forest. What wind there was at their back, and the ape-man, though he moved at a swinging walk, was constantly on the alert. Upon the hard-packed earth of the trail there were few signs to indicate the nature of the animals that had passed to and fro, but here and there the spoor of a lion was in evidence. Several times Tarzan stopped and listened. Often he raised his head, and his sensitive nostrils dilated as he sought for whatever the surrounding air might hold for him. "I think there are men in this valley," he said presently. "For some time I have been almost positive that we are being watched, but whoever is stalking us is clever beyond words, for it is only the barest suggestion of another presence that I can scent." La looked about apprehensively and drew close to his side. "I see no one," she said in a low voice. "Nor I," he replied. "Nor can I catch any well-defined scent spoor, yet I am positive that someone is following us. Someone or something that trails by scent and is clever enough to keep its scent from us. It is more than likely that, whatever it is passing through the trees at a sufficient height to keep its scent spoor always above us. The air is right for that, and even if he were upwind from us, we might not catch his scent at all. Wait here, I will make sure." And he swung lightly into the branches of a nearby tree and swarmed upward with the agility of Manu the monkey. A moment later, he descended to the girl's side. "I was right," he said. "There is someone or something not far off, but whether it is man or Mangani I cannot say, for the odor is a strange one to me, suggesting neither, yet both. But you can play at that game. Come." And he swung the girl to his shoulder, and a moment later had carried her high into the trees. "Unless he is close enough to watch us, which I doubt," he said, "our spoor will be carried over his head, and it will be some time before he can pick it up again, unless he is wise enough to rise to a higher level." Law marveled at the strength of the ape-man as he carried her easily from tree to tree, and at the speed with which he traversed the swaying, leafy trail. For half an hour he continued onward, and then quite suddenly he stopped, poised high above a swaying bough. "Look," he said, pointing ahead and below them. Looking in the direction that he indicated, the girl saw through the leafy foliage a small, heavily stockaded compound, in which there were some dozen huts that immediately riveted her surprised attention. Nor no less was the ape-man's curiosity piqued by what he glimpsed vaguely through the foliage. Huts they evidently were, but they seemed to be moving to and fro in the air, some moving gently backwards and forwards, while others jumped up and down in more or less violent agitation. Tarzan swung to a nearer tree and descended to a sturdy branch, to which he lowered Law from his shoulder. Then he crept forward stealthily, the girl following, for she was, in common with other Oparians, slightly arboreal. Presently they reached a point where they could see plainly the village below them, and immediately the seeming mystery of the dancing huts was explained. They were of the beehive type, common to many African tribes, and were about 7 feet in diameter by 6 or 7 in feet. Let's try that sentence again. They were of the beehive type, common to many African tribes, and were about 7 feet in diameter by 6 or 7 in height. But instead of resting on the ground, each hut was suspended by a heavy hawser-like grass rope to a branch of one of the several giant trees that grew within the stockade. From the center of the bottom of each hut trailed another tighter rope. From his position above them, Tarzan saw no opening in any of the huts large enough to admit the body of a man, though there were several openings 4 or 5 inches in diameter in the sides of each hut, about 3 feet above the floor. Upon the ground, inside the compound, were several of the inhabitants of the village, if the little collection of swinging houses could be dignified by such a name. Nor were the people any less strange to Tarzan than their peculiar domiciles. That they were men was evident, but of a type entirely unfamiliar to the ape-man. All were naked, and without any ornamentation whatsoever other than a few daubs of color placed apparently at random upon their bodies. They were tall and very muscular appearing, though their legs seemed much too short and their arms too long for perfect symmetry, while their faces were almost bestial in contour. Their jaws were exaggeratedly prognathous, whilst above their beetling brows there was no forehead, the skull running back in an almost horizontal plane to a point. As Tarzan stood looking at them, he saw another descend one of the ropes that dangled from the bottom of a hut, and immediately he understood the purpose of the ropes and the location of the entrances to the dwellings. The creatures squatting about upon their haunches were engaged in feeding. Several had bones from which they were tearing the uncooked flesh with their great teeth, while others ate fruit and tubers. There were individuals of both sexes and of various ages, from childhood to maturity, but there were none that seemed very old. They were practically hairless, except for scraggy reddish-brown locks upon their heads. They spoke but seldom, and then in tones which resembled the growling of beasts, nor once, while Tarzan watched them, did he see one laugh or even smile, which of all their traits rendered them most unlike the average native of Africa. Although Tarzan's eyes searched the compound carefully, he saw no indication of cooking utensils or of any fire. Upon the ground about them lay their weapons, short javelin-like spears and a sort of battle-axe with a sharpened metal blade. Tarzan of the Apes was glad that he had come this way, for it had permitted him to see such a type of native that he had not dreamed existed. A type so low that it bordered closely upon the brute. Even the Wazdans and Hodans of Paladon were far advanced in the scale of evolution compared to these. As he looked at them, he could not but wonder that they were sufficiently intelligent to manufacture the weapons they possessed, which he could see, even at a distance, were of fine workmanship and design. Their huts, too, seemed well and ingeniously made, while the stockade which surrounded the little compound was tall, strong, and well built, evidently for the purpose of safeguarding them against the lions which infested the basin. As Tarzan and Law watched these people, they became presently aware of the approach of some creature from their left, and a moment later they saw a man similar to those of the compound swing from a tree that overhung the stockade and drop within. The others acknowledged his coming with scarce more than indifferent glances. He came forward and, squatting among them, appeared to be telling them something. And though Tarzan could not hear his words, he judged from his gestures and the sign language which he used to supplement his meager speech that he was telling his fellows of the strange creatures he had seen in the forest a short time before. And the ape-man immediately judged that this was the same whom he had been aware was following them, and whom he had successfully put off the scent. The narration evidently excited them, for some of them arose and leapt up and down with bent knees, slapping their arms against their sides grotesquely. The expressions upon their faces scarcely changed, however, and after a moment each squatted down again as he had been before. It was while they were thus engaged that there echoed through the forest a loud scream that awakened in the mind of the ape-man many savage memories. "Bolgani," he whispered to Law. "It is one of the great apes," she said, and shuddered. Presently they saw him, swinging down the jungle trail towards the compound. A huge gorilla, but such a gorilla as Tarzan of the Apes had never looked on before. Of almost gigantic stature, the creature was walking erect with the stride of a man, not even once touching his knuckles to the ground. His head and face were almost those of a gorilla, and yet there was a difference, as Tarzan could note as the creature came nearer. It was Bolgani, with the soul and brain of a man. Nor was this all that rendered the creature startling and unique. Stranger perhaps than aught else was the fact that it wore ornaments, and such ornaments. Gold and diamonds sparkled against its shaggy coat. Above its elbows were numerous armlets, and there were anklets upon its legs, while from a girdle about its middle there depended before and behind a long narrow strip that almost touched the ground, and which seemed to be entirely constructed of golden spangles set with small diamonds. Never before had John Clayton, Lord Greystoke, seen such a display of barbaric finery, nor even amidst the jewels of Opar such a wealth of priceless stones. Immediately after the hideous scream had first broken the comparative silence of the forest, Tarzan had noticed its effect upon the inmates of the compound. Instantly they had arisen to their feet. The women and children scurried behind the boles of the trees or clambered up the ropes into their swinging cages, while some of the men advanced to what Tarzan now saw was the gate of the compound. Outside this gate the gorilla halted and again raised his voice, but this time in speech rather than his hideous scream. So that is the end of that chapter. We all still awake out there? Because I'm trying to stay awake. And remain hydrated, remember. Okay, you're awake. I see you. I'm going to take just a quick little break to go get some more water. I am not going to bother putting anything up. I will change to the be right back screen so that anyone that comes in will know I will be back in like a minute or two. I just need some more water. I is a thirsty girl. has to stay hydrated. Behave yourselves out there while I'm gone, okay? I'm trusting you. Alright, my dears, I hope you all stayed warm while I was gone. I'm very sorry that I took your fire away. I didn't want you to be cold. I would never do that to you. So now we will continue on. Actually, I'm a dumbass. Just occurred to me I couldn't hear the fire. Well, duh. I forgot to put my earbuds back in. I am not a smart girl. See, this is why when I say I don't know what I'm doing, I literally don't know what I'm doing. It's okay. Let us continue with our story. We are on chapter 9, The Shaft of Death. So I have switched from water to Coca-Cola, so yay caffeine. As the huge, man-like gorilla entered the compound, the warriors closed the gate and fell back respectfully as he advanced to the center of the village, where he stood for a moment, looking about. "Where are the Shis and the Balas?" he asked tersely. "Call them." The women and the children must have heard the command, but they did not emerge from their hiding places. The warriors moved about uneasily, evidently torn by the conflicting emotions of fear of the creature who had issued the order and reluctance to fulfill his commands. "Call them," he repeated, "or go and fetch them." But at last one of the warriors mustered the courage to address him. "This village has already furnished one woman within the moon," he said. "It is the turn of another village." "Silence," roared the gorilla man, advancing threateningly toward him. "You are a rash Gomangani to threaten the will of a Bolgani. I speak with the voice of Numa, the emperor. Obey or die." Trembling, the black turned and called the women and children, but none responded to his summons. The Bolgani gestured impatiently. "Go and fetch them," he demanded. And the blacks, cringing, moved sullenly across the compound toward the hiding places of their women and children. Presently they returned, dragging them with them, by the arms sometimes, but usually by the hair. Although they had seemed loath to give them up, they showed no gentleness towards them, nor any indication of affection. Their attitude towards them, however, was presently explained to Tarzan by the next words of the warrior who had spoken previously. "Great Bolgani," he said, addressing the gorilla man, "if Numa takes away from this village, always, there will soon be not enough women for the warriors here, and there will be too few children, and in a little time there will be none of us left." "What of that?" growled the gorilla man. "There are already too many Gomangani in the world. For what other purpose were you created than to serve Numa, the emperor, and his chosen people, the Bolgani?" As he spoke, he was examining the women and children, pinching their flesh and pounding upon their chests and backs. Presently he returned to a comparatively young woman, straddling whose hip was a small child. "This one will do," he said, snatching the child from its mother and hurling it roughly across the compound, where it lay against the face of the palisade, moaning pitifully and perchance broken and dying. The poor, stupid mother, apparently more beast than human, stood for a moment trembling in dumb anguish, and then she started to rush forward to her child. But the gorilla man seized her with one of his great hands and hurled her to the ground. Simultaneously, there arose from the silent foliage above them the fierce and terrible scream of the challenging bull-ape. In terror, the simple blacks cast affrighted glances upward, while the gorilla man raised his hideous face in snarling anger towards the author of the bestial cry. Swaying upon a leafy bough, they beheld such a creature as none of them had ever looked upon before. A white man, the Tarmangani, with hide as hairless as the body of Hista, the snake. In the instant that they looked, they saw the spear hand of the stranger drive forward, and the shaft, speeding with the swiftness of thought, bury itself in the breast of the Bolgani. With a single scream of rage and pain, the gorilla man crumpled to the earth, where he struggled spasmodically for a moment and then lay still in death. The ape-man held no great love for the Gomangani as a race, but inherent in his English brain and heart was the spirit of fair play, which prompted him to spontaneous espousal of the cause of the weak. On the other hand, Bolgani was his hereditary enemy. His first battle had been with Bolgani, and his first kill. The poor blacks were still standing in stupefied wonderment when he dropped from the tree to the ground among them. They stepped back in terror, and simultaneously they raised their spears menacingly against him. "I am a friend," he said. "I am Tarzan of the apes. Lower your spears." And then he turned and withdrew his own weapon from the carcass of Bolgani. "Who is this creature that may come into your village and slay your ballast and steal your sheaths? Who is he that you dare not drive your spears through him?" "He is one of the great Bolgani," said the warrior, who seemed to be spokesman and leader in the village. "He is one of the chosen people of Numa, the emperor, and when Numa learns that he has been killed in our village, we shall all die for what you have done." "Who is Numa?" demanded the ape-man, to whom Numa, in the language of the great apes, meant only lion. "Numa is the emperor," replied the black, who lives with the Bogani in the Palace of Diamonds. He did not express himself in just these words, for the meager language of the great apes, even though amplified by the higher intelligence and greater development of the Oparians, is still primitive in the extreme. What he had really said was more nearly, Numa, the king of kings, who lives in the king's hut of glittering stones, which carried to the ape-man's mind the faithful impression of the fact. Numa, evidently, was the name adopted by the king of the Bogani, and the title emperor indicated merely his preeminence among the chiefs. The instant that Bogani had followed, the bereaved mother rushed toward and gathered her injured infant into her arms. She squatted now against the palisade, cuddling it to her breast and crooning softly to pacify its cries, which Tarzan suddenly discovered were more the result of fright than injury. At first the mother had been frightened when he had attempted to examine the child, drawing away and baring her fighting fangs, much after the manner of a wild beast. But presently there had seemed to come to her dull brain a realization that this creature had saved her from Bogani, that he had permitted her to recover her infant, and that he was making no effort to harm either of them. Convinced at last that the child was only bruised, Tarzan turned again towards the warriors, who were talking together in an excited little group a few paces away. As they saw him advancing, they spread into a semicircle and stood facing him. "The Bogani will send and slay us all," they said, "when they learn what has happened in our village, and thus we can take to them the creature that cast the spear. Therefore, Tarmangani, you shall go with us to the Palace of Diamonds, and there we shall give you over to the Bogani, and perhaps Numa will forgive us." The ape-man smiled. What kind of creature did these simple men think him to believe that he would permit himself to be easily led into the avenging hands of Numa, the emperor of the Bogani? Although he was fully aware of the risk that he had taken in entering the village, he knew too that because he was Tarzan of the apes, there was a greater chance that he would be able to escape than that they could hold him. He had faced savage spearmen before and knew precisely what to expect in the event of hostilities. He preferred, however, to make peace with these people, for it had been in his mind to find some means of questioning them the moment that he had discovered their village hidden away in this wild forest. "Wait," he said, therefore. "Would you betray a friend who enters your village to protect you from an enemy?" "We will not slay you, Tarmangani. We will take you to the Bogani for Numa, the emperor." "But that would amount to the same thing," returned Tarzan, "for you well know that Numa, the emperor, will have me slain." "That we cannot help," replied the spokesman. "If we could save you, we would, but when the Bogani discover what has happened in our village, it is we who must suffer, unless perhaps they are satisfied to punish you instead." "But why need they know that the Bogani has been slain in your village?" asked Tarzan. "Will they not see his body next time they come?" asked the spokesman. "Not if you remove his body," replied Tarzan. The men scratched their heads. Into their dull, ignorant minds had crept no such suggestion of a solution of their problem. What the stranger said was true. None but they and he knew that Bogani had been slain within their palisade. To remove the body, then, will be to remove all suspicion from their village. But where were they to take it? They put the question to Tarzan. "I will dispose of him for you," replied the Tarmangani. "Answer my questions truthfully, and I will promise to take him away and dispose of him in such a manner that no one will know how he died or where." "What are your questions?" asked the spokesman. "I am a stranger in your country. I am lost here," replied the ape-man, "and I would find a way out of the valley in that direction," and he pointed towards the southeast. The man shook his head. "There may be a way out of the valley in that direction," he said, "but what lies beyond no man knows, nor do I know whether there be a way out or whether there be anything beyond. It is said that all is fire beyond the mountain, and no one dares to go and see. As for myself, I've never been far from my village, at most only a day's march to hunt for game for the Bogani, and to gather fruits and nuts and plantains for them. If there is a way out, I do not know, nor would any man dare take it if there were." "Does no one ever leave the valley?" asked Tarzan. "I know not what others do," replied the spokesman. "But but those of this village never leave the valley." "What lies in that direction?" asked Tarzan, pointing towards Opar. "I do not know," replied the man. "Only that sometimes the Bolgani come from that way, bringing with them strange creatures, little men with white skins and much hair, with short crooked legs and long arms, and sometimes white shoes, who do not look at all like the strange little Tarmangani. But where they get them I do not know, nor do they ever tell us. Are these all the questions that you wish to ask?" "Yes, that is all," replied Tarzan, seeing that he could gain no information whatsoever from these ignorant villagers. Realizing that he must find his own way out of the valley, and knowing that he could do so much more quickly and safely if he was alone, he decided to sound the men in relation to a plan that had entered his mind. "If I take the Bolgani away, so that the others will not know that he was slain in your village, will you treat me as a friend?" he asked. "Yes," replied the spokesman. "Then," said Tarzan, "will you keep here for me my white she until I return again to your village? You can hide her in one of your huts if a Bolgani comes, and no one need ever know she is among you. What do you say?" The men looked around. "We do not see her," said the spokesman. "Where is she?" "If you will promise to protect her and hide her, I will bring her here," replied the ape-man. "I will not harm her," said the headman, "but I do not know about the others." Tarzan turned towards the others, who were clustered about, listening. "I am going to bring my mate into your village," he said, "and you are going to hide her and feed her and protect her until I return. I shall take away the body of Bolgani, so that no suspicion shall fall upon you, and when I come back I shall expect to find my mate safe and unharmed." He had thought it best to describe Law as his mate, since thus they might understand that she was under his protection, and if they felt either gratitude nor fear towards him, Law would be safer. Raising his face toward the tree where she had hidden, he called to Law to descend, and a moment later she clambered down the lower branches of one of the trees in the compound and dropped into Tarzan's arms. "This is she," he said to the assembled blacks. "Guard her well and hide her from the Bolgani. If, upon my return, I find that any harm has befallen her, I shall take word to the Bolgani that it was you who did this," and he pointed to the corpse of the gorilla man. Law turned appalling towards him, fear showing in her eyes. "You are not going to leave me here?" she asked. "Temporarily only," replied Tarzan. "These poor people are afraid that if the death of this creature is traced to their village, they shall all suffer the wrath of his fellows, and so I have promised that I will remove the evidence in such a way as to direct suspicion elsewhere. If they are sufficiently high in the scale of evolution to harbor sentiments of gratitude, which I doubt, they will feel obligated to me for having slain this beast, as well as for preventing suspicion falling upon them. For these reasons, they should protect you. But to make assurance doubly sure, I have appealed also to the fear of the Bolgani, a characteristic which I know they possess. I am sure that you will be as safe here as with me until I return, otherwise I would not leave you. But alone I can travel much faster, and while I am gone I intend to find a way out of this valley. Then I shall return for you, and together we may make our escape easily, or at least with greater assurance of success than were we to blunder slowly about together." "You will come back?" she asked, a note of fear, longing, and appeal in her voice. "I will come back," he replied, and then turning to the men, "Clear out one of these huts for my mate, and see that she is not molested, and that she is furnished with food and water. And remember what I said, upon her safety your lives depend." Stooping, Tarzan lifted the dead gorilla man to his shoulder, and the simple men marveled at his prowess. Of great physical strength themselves, there was not one of them that would have staggered under the weight of Bolgani, yet the strange Tarmangani walked easily beneath his burden, and when they had opened the gate in the palisade, he trotted down the jungle trail as though he carried nothing but his own frame. A moment later he disappeared at a turn and was swallowed by the forest. Law turned to the men. "Prepare my hut," she said, for she was very tired and longed to rest. They eyed her askance and whispered among themselves. It was evident to her that there was a difference of opinion among them, and presently some snatches of conversation which she overheard, she realized that while some of the blacks were in favor of obeying Tarzan's injunctions implicitly, There were others who objected strenuously and who wished to rid their village of her, lest she be discovered there by the Bongani and the villagers be punished accordingly. It would be better, she heard one of them say, to turn her over to the Bongani at once and tell them that we saw her mate slay the messenger of Numa. We will say that we tried to capture the Tarmangani, but that he escaped, and that we were only able to seize his mate. Thus will we win the favor of Numa, and perhaps then he will not take so many of our women and children. But the Tarmangani is great, replied one of the others. He is more powerful even than Bongani. He would make a terrible enemy, and as the chances are that the Bongani would not believe us, we should then have not only them but the Tarmangani to fear. You are right, cried Law. The Tarmangani is great. Far better will it be for you to have him for a friend than an enemy. Single-handed he grapples with Numa the lion and slays him. You saw with what ease he lifted the body of the mighty Bongani to his shoulder. You saw him trot lightly down the jungle trail beneath his burden. With equal ease will he carry the corpse through the trees of the forest, far above the ground. In all the world there is no one other like him, no other like Tarzan of the apes. If you are wise, Gomangani, you will have Tarzan for a friend. They listened to her, their dull faces revealing nothing of what was passing in their stupid brains. For a few moments they stood thus in silence, the hulking, ignorant men upon one side, the slender, beautiful woman on the other. Then Law spoke. Go, she cried imperiously, and prepare my hut. It was the high priestess of the flaming god, Law, the queen of Opar, addressing slaves. Her regal mind, her commanding tones, wrought an instant change in the villagers, and Law knew then that Tarzan was right in his assumption that they could only be moved through fear. For now they turned quickly, cowering like whipped dogs, and hastened to a nearby hut, which they quickly prepared for her, fetching fresh leaves and grasses for its floor, and fruit and nuts and plantains for her meal. When all was ready, Law clambered up the rope and through the circular opening in the floor of the hanging hut, which she found large and airy and now reasonably clean. She drew the rope up after her and threw herself upon the soft bed they had prepared for her, and soon the gentle swaying of the swinging hut, the soft murmur of the leaves above her, the voices of the birds and insects combined with her own physical exhaustion to lull her into deep slumber. Just a reminder, now that we've reached the end of that chapter, the story is called Tarzan and the Golden Lion. I'm hoping there's a lion in it at some point. I'm starting to lose hope. All right. Hydrated. On we go, chapter 10. Mad Treachery. To the northwest of the valley of Opar. Maybe they are lying about the lion? They might be. They might be. We met a lion at the beginning of the story, I think, in the last stream. We met a lion and then it escaped, and apparently we forgot about him. We don't care about him no more. Yeah, I forgot about that. We've got a lion roaming through the jungle. We've got Tarzan's kid roaming through the jungle. We've got Jane, who I think is heading for somewhere to catch a plane because her father's dying. We will never see them again. We will never see them again. It's like a soap opera. I had forgotten the soap opera that this story is. Now they're just forgotten. Those people just wander in the desert. I mean, the desert, God. I forgot where my story even takes place. The jungle. They'll just wander in the jungle. Lions and kids and wives, oh my. To the northwest of the valley of Opar, the smoke rose from the cook fires of a camp in which some 100 blacks and 6 whites were eating their evening meal. The Negroes squatted sullen and morose, mumbling together in low tones over their meager fare. The whites, scowling and apprehensive, kept their firearms close at hand. One of them, a girl, and the only member of her sex in the party, was addressing her fellows. We have Adolph's stinginess and Esteban's braggadocio to thank for the condition in which we are, she said. The fat Bloober shrugged his shoulder. The big Spaniard scowled. For why, asked Adolph, am I to blame? You were too stingy to employ enough carriers. I told you at the time that we ought to have had 200 blacks in our party, but you wanted to save a little money, and now what is the result? 50 men carrying 80 pounds of gold apiece, and the other carriers are overburdened with camp equipment while there are scarce enough left for Ascari to guard us properly. We have to drive them like beasts to make any progress and keep them from throwing away their loads. They are fagged out and angry. They don't require much of an excuse to kill us all on the spot. On top of all this, they are underfed. If we could keep their bellies filled, we could probably keep them happy and reasonably contented. But I have learned enough about natives to know that if they are hungry, they are neither happy nor contented, even in idleness. If Esteban had not bragged so much about his prowess as a hunter, we should have brought enough provisions to last us through. But now that we are barely started upon our return journey, we are upon less than half rations. I can't kill game when there isn't any game, growled the Spaniard. There's plenty of game, said Krasky the Russian. We see the tracks of it every day. The Spaniard eyed him venomously. If there is so much game, he said, go out and get it yourself. I never claimed to be a hunter, replied Krasky, though I could go out with a slingshot and a pea-shooter and do as well as you have. The Spaniard leapt to his feet menacingly, and instantly the Russian covered him with a heavy service revolver. Cut that business, cried the girl, sharply, leaping between them. Let the blighters fight, growled Jean Peebles. If one of 'em kills the other, there'll be fewer to split the swag, and there we are, and that's that. For why should we quarrel? Demanded Bloober. There is enough for all. Over 43,000 pounds apiece. When you get mad at me, you call me a dirty Jew, and say that I am stingy, but my God, you Christians are worser. You would kill one of your friends to get more money. Oi, thank God that I am not a Christian. Shut up, growled Throck, or we'll have 43,000 pounds more to divide. Bloober eyed the big Englishman fearfully. Come, Dick, he oozed in his oiliest tones. You wouldn't get mad at a little choke, would you? And me, your best friend. I'm sick of all this grousing, said Throck. I hain't no highbrow, but I hain't nothing but a pug. But I got sense enough to know that Flora's the only one in the bloomin' bunch whose brains wouldn't rattle around in a peanut shell. John, Bloober, Krasky, and me, we're here because we could raise the money to carry out Flora's plan. The doggo there, and he indicated Esteban, because his face and his figure filled the bill. There don't any of us need no brains for this work, and there ain't any of us got any more brains than we need. Flora's the brains of this outfit, and the sooner everyone understands that and takes orders from her, the better off we'll be. She's been to Africa with this Lord Greystoke feller before. You was his wife's maid, wasn't you, Flora? And she knows something about the country and the natives and the animals, and there don't none of us know nothin'. Throck is right, said Krasky quickly. We've been muddling long enough. We haven't had a boss, and the thing to do is to make Flora boss from now on. If anyone can get us out of this, she can. And from the way those fellows over there are acting, and he nodded towards the blacks, we'll be lucky if we ever get out with our skins, let alone taking any of the gold with us. Oi, you don't mean to leave the gold, almost shrieked Bloober. I mean that we do whatever Flora thinks best, replied Krasky. If she says to leave the gold, we'll leave it. That we do, seconded the Rock. I'm for it, said Peebles. Whatever Flora says goes. The Spaniard nodded his assent sullenly. The rest of us are all for it, Bloober. How about you? Asked Krasky. Oh, well, sure, if you say so, said Bloober. And as John says, and here we ain't, and that's that. And now, Flora, said Peebles, you're the big un. What you say goes. What'll we do next? Very well, said the girl. We shall camp here until these men are rested, and early tomorrow we'll start out intelligently and systematically, and get meat for them. With their help we can do it. When they are rested and well fed, we will start on again for the coast, moving very slowly so as not to tire them too much. This is my first plan, but it all hinges upon our ability to get meat. If we do not find it, I shall bury the gold here, and we will do our best to reach the coast as quickly as possible. There we shall recruit new porters, twice as many as we have now, and purchase enough provisions to carry us in and out again. As we come back in, we shall cache provisions at every camping place for our return trip, thus saving the necessity of carrying heavy loads all the way in and out again. In this way we can come out light with twice as many porters as we actually need, and by working them in shifts we will travel much faster and there will be no grumbling. These are my 2 plans. I am not asking you what you think of them, because I do not care. You have made me chief, and I am going to run this from now on as I think best. Bully for you, roared Peebles. That's the kind of talk I likes to hear. Tell the head man I want to see him, Carl, said the girl, turning to Krasky, and a moment later the Russian returned with a burly man. Awaza, said the girl, as the black halted before her. We are short of food, and the men are burdened with loads twice as heavy as they should carry. Tell them that we shall wait here until they are rested, and that tomorrow we shall all go out and hunt for meat. You will send your boys out under 3 good men, and they will act as beaters and drive the game into us. In this way we should get plenty of meat, and when the men are rested and well fed, we will move on slowly. Where game is plentiful, we will hunt and rest. Tell them that if they do this, and we reach the coast in safety and with all our loads, I shall pay them twice what they agreed to come for. Oi, oi, spluttered Bloober. Twice what they agreed to come for? Oh, Flora, why not offer them 10%? That would be fine interest on their money. Shut up, you fool, snapped Krasky, and Bloober subsided, though he rocked back and forth, shaking his head in disapproval. The man who had presented himself for the interview with sullen and scowling demeanor brightened visibly now. I will tell them, he said, and I think that you will have no more trouble. Good, said Flora. Go and tell them, and the black turned and left. There, said the girl with a sigh of relief. With a sigh of relief, I believe that we can see light ahead at last. Twice what we promised to pay them, bawled Bloober. Oi, oi. Early the following morning they prepared to set out upon the hunt. The blacks were now smiling and happy in anticipation of plenty of meat, and as they tramped off into the jungle they were singing gaily. Flora had divided them into 3 parties, each under a head man, with explicit directions for the position each party was to take in the line of beaters. Others had been detailed to the whites as gun-bearers, while a small party of the Askari were left behind to guard the camp. The whites, with the exception of Esteban, were armed with rifles. He alone seemed inclined to question Flora's authority, insisting that he preferred to hunt with spear and arrows in keeping with the party he was playing. The fact that, though he had hunted studiously for weeks, yet had never brought in a single kill, was not sufficient to dampen his egotism. So genuinely had he entered his part that he really thought he was Tarzan of the Apes, and with such fidelity that he equipped himself in every detail, and such a master of the art of make-up was he that, in conjunction with his splendid figure and his handsome face, that was almost a counterpart of Tarzan's, it was scarcely to be wondered at that he fooled himself as successfully as he had fooled others. For there were men among the carriers who had known the great ape-man, and even these were deceived, though they wondered at the change in him, since in little things he did not deport himself as Tarzan, and in the matter of kills he was disappointing. Flora Hawkes, who was endowed with more than a fair share of intelligence, realized that it would not be well to cross any of her companions unnecessarily, and so she permitted Esteban to hunt that morning in his own way, though some of the others grumbled a little at her decision. What is the difference? She asked them after the Spaniard had set out alone. The chances are that he could use a rifle no better than he uses his spear and arrows. Carl and Dick are really the only shots among us, and it is upon them we depend principally for the success of our hunt today. Esteban's egotism has been so badly bumped that it is possible that he will go to the last extremity to make a kill today. Let us hope that he is successful. I hope he breaks his full neck, said Krasky. He served our purpose and would be better off if we were rid of him. The girl shook her head negatively. No, she said. We must not think or speak of anything of that kind. We went into this thing together. Let us stick together until the end. If you are wishing that one of us is dead, how do you know that others are not wishing that you were dead? I haven't any doubt that Miranda wishes I were dead, replied Krasky. I never go to bed at night without thinking of the damned greaser may try to stick a knife into me before morning. And it don't make me feel any kinder towards him to hear you defending him, Flora. You've been a bit soft on him from the start. If I have, it's none of your business, retorted the girl. And so they had started out upon the hunt, the Russian scowling and angry, harboring thoughts of vengeance or worse against Esteban. And Esteban, hunting through the jungle, was occupied with his hatred and his jealousy. His dark mind was open to every chance suggestion of a means for putting the other men of the party out of the way, and taking the woman and the gold for himself. He hated them all. In each he saw a possible rival for the affections of Flora, and in the death of each he saw not only one less suitor for the girl's affections, but 43,000 additional pounds to be divided among fewer people. His mind was thus occupied to the exclusion of the business of hunting, which should have occupied him solely, when he came through a patch of heavy underbrush and stepped into the glaring sunlight of a large clearing, face to face with a party of some 50 magnificent ebon warriors. For just an instant, Esteban stood frozen in a paralysis of terror, forgetting momentarily the part he was playing, thinking of himself only as a lone white man in the heart of savage Africa, facing a large band of warlike natives, cannibals perhaps. It was that utter moment of silence and inaction that saved him, for as he stood thus before them, the Wazari saw in the silent, majestic figure their beloved lord in a characteristic pose. "Oh, Bwana, Bwana," cried one of the warriors, rushing forward. "It is indeed you, Tarzan of the Apes, lord of the jungle, whom we had given up as lost. We, your faithful Waziri, have been searching for you, and even now we were about to dare the dangers of Opar, fearing that you might have ventured there without us and been captured." The black, who had at one time accompanied Tarzan to London as a body servant, spoke broken English, an accomplishment of which he was inordinately proud, losing no opportunity to air his attainment before his less fortunate fellows. The fact that it had been he whom fate had chosen to act as spokesman was indeed a fortunate circumstance to Miranda. Although the latter had applied himself assiduously to mastering the dialect of the West Coast carriers, he would have been hard put to it to carry on a conversation with one of them, while he understood nothing of the Waziri tongue. Flora had schooled him carefully and well in the lore of Tarzan, so that he realized now that he was in the presence of the band of the ape-man's faithful Waziri. Never before had he seen such magnificent blacks, clean-cut, powerful men with intelligent faces and well-molded features, appearing as much higher in the scale of evolution as were the West Coast blacks above the apes. Lucky indeed was Esteban Miranda that he was quick-witted and a consummate actor. Otherwise must he have betrayed his terror and his chagrin upon learning that this band of Tarzan's fierce and faithful followers was in this part of the country. For a moment longer he stood in silence before them, gathering his wits, and then he spoke, realizing that his very life depended upon his plausibility. And as he thought, a great light broke upon the shrewd brain of the unscrupulous Spaniard. "Since I last saw you," he said, "I discovered that a party of white men had entered the country for the purpose of robbing the treasure vaults of Opar. I followed them until I found their camp, and then I came in search of you, for there are many of them, and they have many ingots of gold, but they have already been to Opar. Follow me, and we will raid their camp and take the gold from them. Come." And he turned back towards the camp that he had just quitted. As they made their way along the jungle trail, Usula, the Waziri who had spoken English to him, walked at Esteban's side. Behind them, the Spaniard could hear the other warriors speaking their native tongue, no word of which he understood, and it occurred to him that his position would be most embarrassing should he be addressed in the Waziri language, which of course Tarzan must have understood perfectly. As he listened to the chatter of Usula, his mind was working rapidly, and presently, as though it were an inspiration, there recurred to him the memory of an accident that had befallen Tarzan, which had been narrated to him by Flora. The story of the injury he had received in the treasure vaults of Opar upon the occasion that he had lost his memory because of a blow upon the head. Esteban wondered if he had committed himself too deeply at first to attribute to amnesia any shortcomings in the portrayal of the role he was acting. At its worst, however, it seemed to him the best he could do. He turned suddenly upon Usula. "Do you remember," he asked, "the accident that befell me in the treasure vaults of Opar, depriving me of my memory?" "Yes, Bwana, I remember it well," replied the black. "A similar accident has befallen me," said Esteban. "A great tree fell in my path, and in falling, a branch struck me upon the head. It has not caused me to lose my memory entirely, but since then it is with difficulty that I recall many things, and there are others which I must have forgotten entirely, for I do not know your name, nor do I understand the words that my other Waziri are speaking about me." Usula looked at him compassionately. "Ah, Bana, sad indeed is the heart of Usula to hear that this accident has befallen you. Doubtless it will soon pass away, as did the other, and in the meantime I, Usula, will be your memory for you." "Good," said Esteban. "Tell the others that they may understand, and tell them also that I have lost the memory of other things besides. I could not now find my way home without you, and my other senses are dull as well. But as you say, Usula, it will soon pass off, and I shall be myself again." "Your faithful Waziri will rejoice indeed with the coming of that moment," said Usula. As they approached the camp, Miranda cautioned Usula to warn his followers to silence, and presently he halted them at the outskirts of the clearing, where they could attain a view of the boma and the tents, guarding which was a little band of a half-dozen askari. "When they see our greater numbers, they will make no resistance," said Esteban. "Let us surround the camp, therefore, and at a signal from me we will advance together. Then you shall address them, saying that Tarzan of the Apes comes with his Wazari for the gold they have stolen, but that he will spare them if they will leave the country at once and never return." Had it fulfilled his purpose as well, the Spaniard would have willingly ordered his Waziri to fall upon the men guarding the camp and destroy them. But to his cunning brain had been born a cleverer scheme. He wanted these men to see him with the Waziri, and to live to tell the others that they had seen him, and to repeat to Flora and her followers the thing that Esteban had in his mind to tell one of the askari, while the Waziri were gathering up the gold ingots from the camp. In directing Usula to station his men about the camp, Esteban had him warn them that they were not to show themselves until he had crept out into the clearing and attracted the attention of the askari on guard. 15 minutes, perhaps, were consumed in stationing his men, and then Usula returned to Esteban to report that all was ready. "When I raise my hand, then you will know that they have recognized me and that you are to advance," Esteban cautioned him, and stepped forward slowly into the clearing. One of the askari saw him and recognized him as Esteban. The Spaniard took a few steps closer to the boma and then halted. "I am Tarzan of the Apes," he said. "Your camp is entirely surrounded by my warriors. Make no move against us, and we shall not hurt you." He waved his hand. 50 stalwart Waziris stepped into view from the concealed verdure of the surrounding jungle. The askari eyed them in ill-concealed terror, fingering their rifles nervously. "Do not shoot," cautioned Esteban, "or we shall slay you, all." He approached more closely, and his Waziri closed in about him, entirely surrounding the boma. "Speak to them, Usula," said Esteban. The black stepped forward. "We are the Waziri," he cried, "and this is Tarzan of the Apes, Lord of the Jungle, our master. We have come to recover the gold of Tarzan that you have stolen from the treasure vaults of Opar. This time we shall spare you on condition that you leave the country and never return. Tell this word to your masters. Tell them that Tarzan watches, and that his Waziri watch with him. Lay down your rifles." The askari, glad to escape so easily, complied with the demands of Usula, and a moment later the Waziri had entered the boma, and at Esteban's direction were gathering up the golden ingots. As they worked, Esteban approached one of the askari, whom he knew spoke broken English. "Tell your master," he said, "to give thanks for the mercy of Tarzan, who has exacted a toll of but one life for this invasion of his country and theft of his treasure. The creature who presumes to pose as Tarzan I have slain, and his body I shall take away with me and feed to the lions. Tell them that Tarzan forgives even their attempt to poison him upon the occasion that he visited their camp, but only upon the condition that they never return to Africa, and that they divulge the secret of Opar to no others. Tarzan watches, and his Waziri watch, and no man may enter Africa without Tarzan's knowledge. Even before they left London, I knew that they were coming. Tell them that." It took but a few minutes for the Waziri to gather up the golden ingots, and before the askari had recovered from the surprise of their appearance, they had gone again into the jungle with Tarzan, their master. It was late in the afternoon before Flora and the 4 white men returned from their hunt, surrounded by happy, laughing blacks bearing the fruits of a successful chase. "Now that you are in charge, Flora," Kreski was saying, "fortune is smiling upon us indeed. We have enough meat here for several days, and with plenty of meat in their bellies, they ought to make good progress. I will say it to myself, dot things look brighter, said Bloober. Blime, they do that, said Throck. I'm telling you, Flora's a bright one. What the devil is this? Demanded Peebles. What's wrong with them beggars? And he pointed towards the boma, which was now in sight, and from which the Ascari were issuing at a run, jabbering excitedly as they raced towards them. Tarzan of the Apes has been here, they cried excitedly. He has been here with all his Waziri, 1,000 great warriors, and though we fought, they overcame us, and taking the gold, they went away. Tarzan of the Apes spoke strange words to me before they left. He said that he had killed one of your number who had dared to call himself Tarzan of the Apes. We do not understand it. He went away alone to hunt when you went in this morning, and he came back shortly with 1,000 warriors, and he took all the gold, and he threatened to kill us, and you, if you ever return to this country again. What? Cried Bloober. Their gold is gone? Oi! And then they all commenced to ask questions at once until Flora silenced them. Come, she said to the leader of the Ascari. We will return to the boma, and then you should tell me slowly and carefully all that has happened since we left. She listened intently to his narrative, and then questioned him carefully upon various points several times. At last she dismissed him. Then she turned to her confederates. It is all clear to me, she said. Tarzan recovered from the effects of the drug we administered. Then he followed us with his Waziri, caught Esteban and killed him, and finding the camp, has taken the gold away. We shall be fortunate indeed if we escape from Africa with our lives. Oi! Shrieked Bloober. Der dirty crook. He steals all our gold, and we lose our 2,000 pounds into the bargain. Shut up, growled Throck. If it hadn't been for you and this doggo here, things never would have happened. With him a-bragging about his hunting and not being able to kill anything, and you a squeezing every bloomin' happening, we're in a rotten mess, that we are. This here Tarzan blounder, he bumped off Esteban, which is the best work would have ever done. Too bloody bad you weren't here to get it to, and what I got a good mind to do is slit your throat myself. Stow the guff, Dick, roared Peebles. It wasn't anybody's fault, as far as I can see. Instead of talking, what we oughter do is to go after this here Tarzan feller and take the bloomin' gold away from him. Flora Hawks laughed. We haven't a chance in the world, she said. I know this Tarzan bloke. If he was all alone, we wouldn't be a match for him. But he's got a bunch of his Waziri with him, and there are no finer warriors in Africa than that. And they'd fight for him to the last man. You just tell Awaza that you're thinking of going after Tarzan of the Apes and his Waziri to take the gold away from them, and see how long it'd be before we wouldn't have a single man with us. The very name of Tarzan scares these West Coast folks out of a year's growth. They would sooner face the devil. No, sir, we've lost. And all we can do is get out of the country and thank our lucky stars if we manage to get out alive. The ape-man will watch us. I should not be surprised if he were watching us this minute. Her companions looked around apprehensively at this, casting nervous glances towards the jungle. And he'd never let us get back to Opar for another load, even if we could prevail upon our blacks to return there. 2,000 pounds, 2,000 pounds, wailed Bloober. And all this suit, for it cost me 20 guineas, but I can't wear it again in England unless I go to a fancy dress ball, which I never do. Krasky had not spoken, but had sat with eyes upon the ground, listening to the others. Now he raised his head. We have lost our gold, he said, and before we get back to England we stand to spend the balance of our 2,000 pounds. In other words, our expedition is a total loss. The rest of you may be satisfied to go back broke, but I am not. There are other things in Africa besides the gold of Opar, and when we leave the country there is no reason why we shouldn't take something with us that will repay us for our time and investment. What do you mean? Asked Peebles. I've spent a lot of time talking with Awaza, replied Krasky, trying to learn their crazy language, and I've come to find out a lot about the old villain. He's as crooked as they make them, and if he were to be hanged for all his murders, he'd have to have more lives than a cat. But notwithstanding all that, he's a shrewd old fellow, and I've learned a lot more from him than just his money talk. I've learned enough, in fact, so that I feel pretty safe in saying that if we stick together, we can go out of Africa with a pretty good-sized stake. Personally, I haven't given up the gold of Opar yet. What we've lost, but there's plenty left where that came from, And someday, after this blows over, I'm coming back to get my share. But how about this other thing? Asked Flora. How can Awaza help us? There's a little bunch of Arabs down here, explained Krasky, stealing slaves and ivory. Awaza knows where they are working and where their main camp is. There are only a few of them, and the blacks are nearly all slaves who would turn on them in a minute. Now the idea is this. We have a big enough party to overpower them and take their ivory away from them if we can get their slaves to take our side. We don't want the slaves. We couldn't do anything with them if we had them. So we can promise them their freedom for their help and give Awaza and his gang a share in the ivory. How do you know Awaza will help us? Asked Flora. The idea is his. That's the reason I know, replied Krasky. It sounds good to me, said Peebles. I ain't for going home empty-handed, and in turn the others signified their approval of the scheme. We all still awake out there? Shall we go on to another chapter? We still have found no lions. Beta casual racism. No golden lion. Well, we know that Zoiku is awake. Chapter 11. Strange incense burns. As Tarzan carried the dead Bolgani from the village of the Gomangani, he set his steps in the direction of the building he had seen from the rim of the valley, the curiosity of the man overcoming the natural caution of the beast. He was traveling upwind, and the odors wafted down to his nostrils told him that he was approaching the habitat of the Bolgani. Intermingled with the scent spore of the gorilla man was that of Gomangani, and the odor of cooked food, and the suggestion of a heavily sweet scent which the ape-man could connect only with burning incense, though it seemed impossible that such a fragrance could emanate from the dwellings of the Bolgani. Perhaps it came from the great edifice he had seen, a building which must have been constructed by human beings, and in which human beings might still dwell, though never among the multitudinous odors that assailed his nostrils did he once catch the faintest suggestion of the man's scent of whites. When he perceived from the increasing strength of their odor that he was approaching close to the Bolgani, Tarzan took to the trees with his burden, that he might thus stand a better chance of avoiding discovery, and presently through the foliage ahead he saw a lofty wall, and beyond the outlines of the weird architecture of a strange and mysterious pile. Outlines that suggested a building of another world, so unearthly were they, and from beyond the wall came the odor of the Bolgani and the fragrance of the incense, intermingled with the scent spore of Numa, the lion. The jungle was cleared away for 50 feet outside the wall, surrounding the building, so that there was no tree overhanging the wall, but Tarzan approached as closely as he could, while still remaining reasonably well concealed by the foliage. He had chosen a point at a sufficient height above the wall to permit him to see over the top of the wall. The building within the enclosure was of great size, its different parts appearing to have been constructed at various periods, and each with utter disregard to uniformity, resulting in a conglomeration of connecting buildings and towers, no two of which were alike, though the whole presented a rather pleasing, if somewhat bizarre appearance. The building stood upon an artificial elevation about 10 feet wide, surrounded by a retaining wall of granite, a wide staircase leading to the ground level below. About the building were shrubbery and trees, some of the latter appearing to be of great antiquity, while one enormous tower was almost entirely covered by ivy. By far the most remarkable feature of the building, however, lay in its rich and barbaric ornamentation. Set into the polished granite of which it was composed was an intricate mosaic of gold and diamonds. Glittering stones in countless thousands scintillated from facades, minarets, domes, and towers. The enclosure, which comprised some 15 or 20 acres, was occupied for the most part by the building. The terrace upon which it stood was devoted to walks, flowers, shrubs, and ornamental trees. while that part of the area below, which was within the range of Tarzan's vision, seemed to be given over to the raising of garden truck. In the garden and upon the terrace were naked blacks, such as he had seen in the village where he had left Law. There were both men and women, and these were occupied with the care of growing things within the enclosure. Among them were several of the gorilla-like creatures such as Tarzan had slain in the village, but these performed no labor, devoting themselves rather, it seemed, to directing the work of the blacks, towards whom their manner was haughty and domineering, sometimes even brutal. These gorilla men were trapped in rich ornaments, similar to those upon the body which now rested in a crotch of the tree behind the ape-man. As Tarzan watched with interest the scene below him, two Bolgani emerged from the main entrance, a huge portal some 30 feet in width and perhaps 15 feet high. The two wore headbands supporting tall white feathers. As they emerged, they took post on either side of the entrance, and cupping their hands before their mouths, gave voice to a series of shrill cries that bore a marked resemblance to trumpet calls. Immediately the blacks ceased work and hastened to the foot of the stairs descending from the terrace to the garden. Here they formed two lines on either side of the stairway, and similarly the Bolgani formed two lines upon the terrace from the main portal to the stairway, forming a living aisle from one to the other. Presently from the interior of the building came another trumpet-like call, and a moment later Tarzan saw the head of a procession emerging. First came 4 Bolgani abreast, each bedecked with an ornate feather headdress, and each carrying a huge bludgeon erect before him. Behind these came 2 trumpeters, and 20 feet behind the trumpeters paced a huge black-maned lion, held in leash by 4 steady blacks, 2 upon each side, holding what appeared to be golden chains that ran to a scintillant diamond collar about the beast's neck. Behind the lion marched 20 more Bolgani, 4 abreast. These carried spears, but whether they were for the purpose of protecting the lion from the people or the people from the lion, Tarzan was at a loss to know. The attitude of the Bolgani lining either side of the way between the portal and the stairway indicated extreme deference, for they bent their bodies from their waists in a profound bow while Numa was passing between their lines. When the beast reached the top of the stairway, the procession halted, and immediately the Gomangani ranged below prostrated themselves and placed their foreheads on the ground. Numa, who was evidently an old lion, stood with lordly mien surveying the prostrate humans before him. His evil eyes glared glassily, the while he bared his tusks in a savage grimace, and from his deep lungs rumbled forth an ominous roar, at the sound of which the Gomangani trembled in unfeigned terror. The ape-man knit his brows in thought. Never before had he been called upon to witness so remarkable a scene of the abasement of man before beast. Presently the procession continued upon its way, descending the staircase and turning to the right along a path through the garden, and when it had passed them, the Gomangani and the Bolgani arose and resumed their uninterrupted duties. Tarzan remained in his concealment, watching them, trying to discover some explanation for the strange paradoxical conditions that he had witnessed. The lion, with his retinue, had turned the far corner of the palace and disappeared from sight. What was he to these people, to these strange creatures? What did he represent? Why this topsy-turvy arrangement of species? Here man ranked lower than the half-beast, and above all, from the deference that had been accorded him, stood a true beast, a savage carnivore. He had been occupied with his thoughts and his observations for some 15 minutes following the disappearance of Numa around the eastern end of the palace, when his attention was attracted to the opposite end of the structure by the sound of some shrill trumpet calls. Turning his eyes in that direction, he saw the procession emerging again into view, and immediately proceeded towards the staircase down which they had entered the garden. The notes of the shrill call sounded upon their ears. The Gomangani and the Bolgani resumed their original positions from below the foot of the staircase to the entrance to the palace, and once again was homage paid to Numa as he made his triumphal entry into the building. Tarzan of the Apes ran his fingers through his mass of tousled hair, but finally he was forced to shake his head in defeat. He could find no explanation whatsoever for all that he had witnessed. His curiosity, however, was so keenly piqued that he determined to investigate the palace and surrounding grounds further before continuing on his way in search of a trail out of the valley. Leaving the body of Bolgani where he had cached it, He started slowly to circle the building that he might examine it from all sides from the concealing foliage of the surrounding forest. He found the architecture equally unique upon all sides, and that the garden extended entirely around the building, though a portion upon the south side of the palace was given over to corrals and pens in which were kept numerous goats and a considerable flock of chickens. Upon this side also were several hundred swinging beehive huts, such as he had seen in the native village of the Gomangani. These he took to be the quarters of the black slaves, who performed all the arduous and menial labor connected with the palace. The lofty granite wall which surrounded the entire enclosure was pierced by but a single gate, which opened opposite the east end of the palace. This gate was large and of massive construction, appearing to have been built to withstand the assault of numerous and well-armed forces. So strong did it appear that the ape-man could not but harbor the opinion that it had been constructed to protect the interior against forces equipped with heavy battering rams. That such a force had ever existed within the vicinity in historic times seemed most unlikely, and Tarzan conjectured therefore that the wall and the gate were of almost unthinkable antiquity, dating doubtless from the forgotten age of the Atlanteans, and constructed perhaps to protect the builders of the Palace of Diamonds from the well-armed forces that had come from Atlantis to work the gold mines of Opar, and to colonize Central Africa. While the wall, the gate, and the palace itself suggested in many ways almost unbelievable age, they were in such an excellent state of repair that it was evident that they were still inhabited by rational and intelligent creatures. While upon the south side Tarzan had seen a new tower in progress of construction, where a number of blacks working under the direction of Bolgani were cutting and shaping granite blocks and putting them in place. Tarzan had halted in a tree near the east gate to watch the life passing in and out of the palace grounds beneath the ancient portal, and as he watched, a long cavalcade of powerful Gomangani emerged from the forest and entered the enclosure. Swung in hides between two poles, this party was carrying rough-hewn blocks of granite, 4 men to a block. 2 or 3 Bolgani accompanied the long line of carriers, which was preceded and followed by a detachment of black warriors armed with battle axes and spears. The demeanor and attitude of the black porters, as well as of the Bolgani, suggested to the ape-man nothing more nor less than a caravan of donkeys, plodding their stupid way at the behest of their drivers. If one lagged, he was prodded with the point of a spear or struck with its shaft. There was no greater brutality shown than in the ordinary handling of beasts of burden in the world around, nor in the demeanor of the blacks was there any more indication of objection or revolt than you see depicted upon the faces of a long line of burden-bearing mules. To all intents and purposes they were dumb-driven cattle. Slowly they filed through the gateway and disappeared from sight. A few moments later another party came out of the forest and passed into the palace grounds. This consisted of fully 50 armed Bolgani and twice as many black warriors with spears and axes. Entirely surrounded by these armed creatures were 4 brawny porters, carrying a small litter upon which was fastened an ornate chest about 2 feet wide by 4 feet long, with a depth of approximately 2 feet. The chest itself was of some dark, weather-worn wood, and was reinforced by bands and corners of what appeared to be virgin gold, in which were set many diamonds. What the chest contained Tarzan could not of course conceive, but that it was considered of great value was evidenced by the precautions for safety with which it had been surrounded. The chest was borne directly into the huge ivy-covered tower at the northeast corner of the palace, the entrance to which Tarzan now first observed was secured by doors as large and heavy as the east gate itself. At the first opportunity that he could seize to accomplish it undiscovered, Tarzan swung across the jungle trail and continued through the trees to the one in which he had left the body of the Bolgani. Throwing this across his shoulder, he returned to a point close above the trail near the east gate, and seized upon a moment when there was a lull in the traffic, he hurled the body as close to the portal as possible. Now, thought the ape-man, let them guess who slew their fellow if they can. Making his way towards the southeast, Tarzan approached the mountains which lie back of the valley of the Palace of Diamonds. He had often to make detours to avoid native villages and to keep out of sight of the numerous parties of Bolgani that seemed to be moving in all directions through the forest. Late in the afternoon he came out of the hills into full view of the mountains beyond. Rough granite hills they were, whose precipitous peaks arose far above the timberline. Directly before him, a well-marked trail led into a canyon, which he could see wound far upward towards the summit. This, then, would be as good a place to commence his investigations as another. And so, seeing the coast was clear, the ape-man descended from the trees, and taking advantage of the underbrush bordering the trail, made his way silently, yet swiftly, into the hills. For the most part, he was compelled to worm his way through thickets, for the trail was in constant use by Gomangani and Bolgani, parties passing up it empty-handed and returning bearing blocks of granite. As he advanced more deeply into the hills, the heavy underbrush gave way to a lighter growth of scrub, through which he could pass with far greater ease, though with considerable more risk of discovery. However, the instinct of the beast that dominated Tarzan's jungle craft permitted him to find cover where another would have been in full view of every enemy. Halfway up the mountain, the trail passed through a narrow gorge, not more than 20 feet wide, and eroded from solid granite cliffs. Here there was no concealment whatsoever, and the ape-man realized that to enter it would mean almost immediate discovery. Glancing about, he saw that by making a slight detour he could reach the summit of the gorge, where, amid tumbled granite boulders and stunted trees and shrubs, he knew that he could find sufficient concealment and perhaps a plainer view of the trail beyond. Nor was he mistaken, for when he had reached a vantage point far above the trail, he saw ahead an open pocket in the mountain, the cliffs surrounding which were honeycombed with numerous openings, which, it seemed to Tarzan, could be naught else than the mouths of tunnels. Rough wooden ladders reached to some of them, closer to the base of the cliffs, while from others knotted ropes dangled to the ground below. Out of these tunnels emerged men carrying little sacks of earth, which they dumped in a common pile beside a rivulet which ran through the gorge. Here other blacks, supervised by Bolgani, were engaged in washing the dirt, but what they hoped to find or what they did, Tarzan could not guess. Along one side of the rocky basin, many other blacks were engaged in quarrying the granite from the cliffs, which had been cut away through similar operations into a series of terraces running from the floor of the basin to the summit of the cliff. Here naked blacks toiled with primitive tools under the supervision of savage Bolgani. The activities of the quarrymen were obvious enough, but what the others were bringing from the mouths of the tunnels Tarzan could not be positive, though the natural assumption was that it was gold. Where then did they obtain their diamonds? Certainly not from these solid granite cliffs. A few minutes' observation convinced Tarzan that the trail he had followed from the forest ended in this little cul-de-sac, and so he sought a way upward and around it in search of a pass across the range. The balance of that day and nearly all the next he devoted to his efforts in this direction, only in the end to be forced to admit that there was no egress from the valley upon this side. To points far above the timberline he made his way, but there always he came face to face with sheer perpendicular cliffs of granite towering high above him, upon the face of which not even the ape-man could find foothold. Along the southern and eastern sides of the basin he carried his investigation, but with similar disappointing results, and then at last he turned his steps back towards the forest, with the intention of seeking a way out through the valley of Opar with Law, after darkness had fallen. The sun had just risen when Tarzan arrived at the native village in which he had left Law, and no sooner did his eyes rest upon it than he became apprehensive that something was amiss. For not only was the gate wide open, but there was no sign of life within the palisade, nor was there any movement of the swinging huts that would indicate that they were occupied. Always wary of ambush, Tarzan reconnoitered carefully before descending into the village. To his trained observation, it became evident that the village had been deserted for at least 24 hours. Running to the hut in which Law had been hidden, he hastily ascended the rope and examined the interior. It was vacant, nor was there any sign of the high priestess. Descending to the ground, the ape-man started to make a thorough investigation of the village in search of clues to the fate of its inhabitants and of Law. He had examined the interiors of several huts when his keen eyes noted a slight movement of one of the swinging, cage-like habitations some distance from him. Quickly he crossed the intervening space, and as he approached the hut he saw that no rope trailed from its doorway. Halting beneath, Tarzan raised his face to the aperture, through which nothing but the roof of the hut was visible. "Gomangani," he cried, "it is I, Tarzan of the Apes. Come to the opening and tell me what has become of your fellows and of my mate, whom I left here under the protection of your warriors." There was no answer, and again Tarzan called, for he was positive that someone was hiding in the hut. "Come down," he called again, "or I will come up after you." Still there was no reply. A small smile touched the ape-man's lips as he drew his hunting knife from its sheath and placed it between his teeth, and then, with a cat-like spring, leapt for the opening, and catching its sides, drew his body up into the interior of the hut. If he had expected opposition, he met with none, nor in the dimly lighted interior could he at first distinguish any presence, though when his eyes became accustomed to the semi-darkness, he descried a bundle of leaves and grasses lying against the opposite wall of the structure. Crossing to these, he tore them aside, revealing the huddled form of a terrified woman. Seizing her by a shoulder, he drew her to a sitting position. "What has happened?" he demanded. "Where are the villagers? Where is my mate?" "Do not kill me! Do not kill me!" she cried. "It was not I. It was not my fault." "I do not intend to kill you," replied Tarzan. "Tell me the truth, and you shall be safe." "The Bogani have taken them away," cried the woman. "They came when the sun was low upon the day that you arrived, and they were very angry, for they had found the body of their fellow outside the gate of the Palace of Diamonds. They knew that he had come here to our village, and no one had seen him alive since he had departed from the palace. They came then, and threatened and tortured our people, until at last the warriors told them. I hid. I do not know why they did not find me, but at last they went away, taking all the others with them, taking your mate too. They will never come back." "You think that the Bogani will kill them?" asked Tarzan. "Yes," she replied. "They kill all who displease them." Alone now, and relieved of the responsibility of law, Tarzan might easily make his way by night through the valley of Opar and to safety beyond the barrier. But perhaps such a thought never entered his head. Gratitude and loyalty were marked characteristics of the ape-man. Law had saved him from the fanaticism and intrigue of her people. She had saved him at a cost of all that was most dear to her, power and position, peace and safety. She had jeopardized her life for him and become an exile from her own country. The mere fact that the Bogani had taken her with the possible intention of slaying her was not sufficient for the ape-man. He must know whether or not she lived, and if she lived, he must devote his every energy to winning her release and her eventual escape from the dangers of this valley. Tarzan spent the day reconnoitering outside the palace grounds, seeking an opportunity of gaining entrance without detection, but this he found impossible, inasmuch as there was never a moment that there were not Gomangani or Balani in the outer garden. But with the approach of darkness, the great east gate was closed, and the inmates of the huts and palace withdrew within their walls, leaving not even a single sentinel without, a fact that indicated clearly that the Bogani had no reason to apprehend an attack. The subjugation of the Gomangani, then, was apparently complete, and so the towering wall surrounding their palace, which was more than sufficient to protect them from the inroads of lions, was but the remainder of an ancient day when a once powerful but now vanished enemy threatened their peace and safety. When darkness had finally settled, Tarzan approached the gate, and throwing the noose of his grass rope over one of the carved lions that capped the gateposts, ascended quickly to the summit of the wall, from where he dropped lightly into the garden below. To ensure an avenue for quick escape in the event that he found Law, he unlatched the heavy gates and swung them open. Then he crept stealthily towards the ivy-covered east tower, which he had chosen after a day of investigation as offering easiest ingress to the palace. The success of his plan hinged largely upon the age and strength of the ivy, which grew almost to the summit of the tower, and to his immense relief he found that it would easily support his weight. Far above the ground, near the summit of the tower, he had seen from the trees surrounding the palace an open window, which, unlike the balance of those in this part of the palace, was without bars. Dim lights shone from several of the tower windows, as from those of other parts of the palace. Avoiding these lighted apertures, Tarzan ascended quickly, though carefully, towards the unbarred window above. And as he reached it and cautiously raised his eyes above the level of the sill, he was delighted to find that it opened into an unlighted chamber, the interior of which, however, was so shrouded in darkness that he could discern nothing within. Drawing himself carefully to the level of the sill, he crept quietly into the apartment beyond. Groping through the blackness, he cautiously made the rounds of the room, which he found to contain a carved bedstead of peculiar design, a table, and a couple of benches. Upon the bedsteads were stuffs of woven material, thrown over the softly tanned pelts of antelopes and leopards. Opposite the window through which he had entered was a closed door. This he opened slowly and silently until, through a tiny aperture, he could look out upon a dimly lighted corridor or circular hallway, in the center of which was an opening about 4 feet in diameter, passing through which and disappearing beyond a similar opening in the ceiling directly above was a straight pole with short crosspieces fastened to it at intervals of about a foot, quite evidently the primitive staircase which gave communication between the various floors of the tower. 3 upright columns, set at equal intervals about the circumference of the circular opening in the center of the floor, helped to support the ceilings above. Around the outside of this circular hallway there were other doors similar to that opening into the apartment in which he was. And now we have to take a break so I can stand up and get back on my chair because it's leaning forward and I'm about to fall on my ass. Alright. Sliding out of the chair has been avoided. Hearing no noise and seeing no evidence of another than himself, Tarzan opened the door and stepped into the hallway. His nostrils were now assailed strongly by the same heavy fragrance of incense that had first greeted him upon his approach to the palace several days before. In the interior of the tower, however, he was filled with consternation at the prospect of the well-nigh impossible task that confronted him. To search this great tower alone, without any assistance whatever from his keen sense of scent, seemed impossible of accomplishment if he were to take even the most ordinary precautions against detection. The ape-man's self-confidence was in no measure blundering egotism. Knowing his limitations, he knew that he would have little or no chance against even a few Bolgani were he to be discovered within their palace, where all was familiar to them and strange to him. Behind him was the open window, and the silent jungle night and freedom. Ahead danger, predestined failure, and quite likely death. Which should he choose? For a moment he stood in silent thought, and then, raising his head and squaring his great shoulders, he shook his black locks defiantly, and stepped boldly towards the nearest door. Room after room he had investigated until he had made the entire circle of the landing, but in so far as law or any clue to her were concerned, his search was fruitless. He found quaint furniture and rugs and tapestries and ornaments of gold and diamonds, and in one dimly lighted chamber he came upon a sleeping Bolgani, but so silent were the movements of the ape-man that the sleeper slept on undisturbed. Even though Tarzan passed entirely around his bed, which was set in the center of the chamber, and investigated a curtained alcove beyond. Having completed the rounds of this floor, Tarzan determined to work upward first, and then, returning, investigate the lower stages later. Pursuant to this plan, therefore, he ascended the strange stairway. 3 landings he passed before he reached the upper floor of the tower. Circling each floor was a ring of doors, all of which were closed, while dimly lighting each landing were feebly burning cressets, shallow golden bowls, containing what appeared to be tallow, in which floated a tow-like wick. Upon the upper landing there were but 3 doors, all of which were closed. The ceiling of this hallway was the dome-like roof of the tower, in the center of which was another circular opening, through which the stairway protruded into the darkness of the night above. As Tarzan opened the door nearest him, it creaked upon its hinges, giving forth the first audible sound that had resulted from his investigations up to this point. The interior of the apartment before him was unlighted, and as Tarzan stood there in the entrance in statuesque silence for a few seconds, following the creaking of the hinge, he was suddenly aware of movement, of the faintest shadow of a sound behind him. Wheeling quickly, he saw the figure of a man standing in an open doorway upon the opposite side of the building. that is the end of that chapter, and I think that is going to be the end of our reading for tonight. We have made it halfway through the story, so we will get there eventually. So for right now, I'm going to see if I can find someone else that I can send you all over to. See who else is streaming tonight. What's wrong? It's like, are you cold because you don't have your fire? I will find you someone, I promise. Maybe. It looks like only you sure you'll be all right? I mean, I could just do a stream where I don't even talk. It's just the fireplace. That would be interesting. Anyway, thank you all very much for hanging out with me for this reading. I do appreciate all of you. I hope you enjoyed the reading and my stumbling with words. I am going to send you all over to Kiko Pigeons because that seems like a good channel. We are nice and chill here. We need to go visit a chill stream. Why is it not? Yes. Yes, we must sleep. We must all sleep. All of us. Thank you for the follow, Blaze. Very much appreciated. Welcome to the Campfire Club. Why is it saying that the pigeons are not online? Don't understand. There we go. So I'm going to send you to the pigeons. The pigeons are very sweet and they're very quiet. They just make soft cooing sounds, which is good to follow up a nice chill reading stream with, I think. So again, I hope that you are all well. I wish the best for all of you in 2020. We will finish this story. I swear we will finish this story. I don't know how long it will take, but we will finish it. So again, thank you all. Say hi to the pigeons. Have a good day, a good night, a good sleep, and we will see you soon.